Three, two, one. Hello and welcome to my podcast. I'm your host, Larry Liu, and today I have a special guest here, Dennis Murphy, whom I've already had last year, so I'm not going to spend too much time on introducing him here. So, Dennis, welcome to the podcast. Thank you for joining.
It's a pleasure being back.
So, maybe we'll start it off a little bit easy and talk a little bit about what we've been doing this past year. So, uh, are you still in the Zeiss School in Johns Hopkins?
Recently graduated. So, like a lot of graduate students, there was the graduation under COVID conditions. So, the physical campus shut down for the last 5 months or so of the education. So, since then, I haven't really been back to SICE. I've since left DC, so no longer really around the Johns Hopkins, Georgetown, George Washington area. Instead, I'm back with my parents for a little while, ready to go off to a new educational opportunity in just a couple months.
And is that okay to talk about this? I mean, or do you want to keep
Yeah,
that?
it's fine. So I was admitted into Northeastern with everything paid for, and they said I could do whatever I want for 5 years. So I said, sounds good to me. So
A
I'll
PhD
be,
program.
yes, in political science.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
that's a good program. I mean, and so, what do you plan to uh, do in your PhD studies?
essentially, what I want to do is disaggregate and create models whereby the technological advancements that we have made, which make human behavior predictive, may hold dual use for things like active measures, societal instability, and great power competition. In a sense, I want to see the degree to which the information revolution, and particularly developments in AI, especially for relatively benign things like marketing. I mean, I'm sure we all take a look at Facebook and see ads that we really would be surprised to see, and see the degree to which those are useful in something akin to cognitive warfare between nations. So that's what I'm going to be studying. Northeastern has a very good network science lab. It has and it has pretty good people there. It's also right by MIT and Harvard, so I'm going to be coordinating with them. And the basic premise of my work will be to understand and then to disrupt and prevent. Right now we don't seem to be needing all that much help with regards towards democratic decline or democratic decay. But in the future, it seems as though the tools that we are building are not really fully understood with regards towards their implications in a democratic society. So I want to see the degree to which I can play a role in trying to understand that, and ultimately to try to, I think I used the term bug proof as if it was a computer, but bug proof democracy against such things as AI generated active measures akin to that.
Okay, so an important point that you bring up is democratic decline, and you link that to this AI revolution, to the prevalence of social media. Uh, for the uninitiated in the audience, you might want to explain the link between these two.
Okay. So let's talk about machine learning for a minute. At its most basic component, machine learning is pattern recognition. So you feed enough information into an AI so that it can then begin to recognize patterns independent of the data you use to train it. Now, one of the things that we've discovered is that these tools are fundamentally powerful in shaping our understanding of human behavior in a way that us as human beings have been fundamentally unable to do. If you take a look at things such as marketing practices now, you'll find very little individual human intuition remaining. There's some of it, but a lot of it has to do with models of development informed by massive amounts of data and different algorithms that are designed to show you this is where new opportunities lie. And you see a lot of this with regards towards consumer-based models of economy. So things like Amazon, Facebook, Google, these are institutions that are built off of ensuring that they are able to anticipate your wants before you know them. Of course, the problem with that, beyond, in a way, being able to mimic predatory marketing practices, is that it's able to identify specific groups in such a way that it can expose them to information that is likely to alter opinion in a way that may be dramatically disadvantageous to a stable functioning society. And that is the upshot of the vulnerability. Right now, we're running into a question about capabilities. To what extent are various groups capable of taking this model and running with it? Right now, no one's really fully capable of doing it. They've tried. A few firms continue to try, particularly inside of primaries and general elections. You find consulting groups that try to do this. But the evidence of their efficacy at the moment is a little bit less than they market it as, because at the end of the day, these are private businesses trying to give you the mirage of their own omnipotence. And we know that their ability to change things is more limited than they would like to admit. The problem is all tools when they start out are pretty embarrassing. The first AIs that try to play chess weren't very hard to beat. But now it's almost impossible to beat an AI in chess. Right now, the thing that we're trying to do is build AIs to beat other AIs. So we've got Stockfish, we've got AlphaZero, and we've got other things being built up, and they're very fascinating to watch. And if you have a very high level of chess capabilities, you can learn a lot from them. The problem is, Magnus Carlsen isn't exactly going to be beating them anytime soon, which is a little bit of a problem. You can see this with regards towards Go. Go recently started being an AI specialty. It started beating... Oh, no, it did beat. It did beat just about every major champion it's gone up against in the past couple of years. And now, complex games. And complex games are the things that you really need to worry about. Because Go has simple rules, chess has simple rules. Now you're starting to see things like StarCraft, a major internet sports game that is starting to be played by AI and win. So we're entering into a phase where I don't actually think that AI is going to be that important in undermining democracy and as a function of great power competition now. But I believe it is increasingly relevant, such that in about 2 to 3 decades, we're going to be in a lot of trouble. And I do mean a lot of trouble. And I'm not really sure how to deal with that. But I do know I want to study it and try to find a way to stop it, which makes me a little bit of a Luddite, but whatever.
Yeah. I mean, so there's a little bit of a logical leap here, right? Where you say that once AI is able to beat us in games like Go or chess, very strategic games that have very clear circumscribed rules, that it would be then possible to also manipulate our fears and desires, such that it would alter our electoral decisions. I mean, that seems to be you sort of linking that capacity of AI with what's happening in the electoral system, right?
I mean, yes. I was using that example particularly to show that AI progresses from being stupid to intelligent, so that as time goes on, the greater complexity can be added towards AI tools in order to achieve objectives that are increasingly complex and encroaching upon the domain of what is considered traditional human roles. With regards towards its ability to influence the electoral system, that I wouldn't use StarCraft for that. I would use ordinary marketing practices. So we're already able to influence marginal consumer preference with AIs in marketing practices. It's the
Yeah.
entire business model of most big tech firms. And electoral preference is a consumer preference. The only way you can really get around that is if you tweak our understanding of electoral models such that there's limited ability to draw upon consumer preference models. But I see no reason to do that. In fact, the only thing that would really restore my confidence are complex interactions and hidden preferences. So a little bit of Timur Kuran. Otherwise, kind of really unhappy with the direction that things are going.
Yeah, so there was this book by Shoshana Zuboff. I think it was published earlier
Was that
this
surveillance
year or last
capitalism?
year. Surveillance Capitalism, yeah. And I think she makes a big argument targeting, Facebook, Amazon to a smaller extent, but also Google. And so she has this concept of behavioral surplus, right? Which is sort of like, I guess, appropriating a Marxist concept of surplus expropriation. But the behavioral surplus is this idea that, is what you just mentioned, right? So it's about anticipating potential future needs and desires, because we already influence these algorithms anyway. Like if I say, oh, I like to have, wear black socks or something like that, right? So I'll type that in. And then on my Google and Facebook searches, all of a sudden I see black sock commercials everywhere, right? So things like that. But then that, in a sense, is, you could say, a nefarious application of how we're, as users are being abused. And then so the old saying in dealing with social media, internet services, is that if you don't pay for the product, then you become the product.
Mm-hmm.
And it's true that, with the conveniences of Skype is a Microsoft product, and then if you use Google Maps to go anywhere, if you're on Facebook most of the day, debating with people. So it seems to be that there's a handful of technology companies who have been able to so thoroughly dominate our attention space and our consumer dollars, and that you would argue is a very scary prospect, right?
I would argue that it's a scary prospect, but just a couple of additional things. So the reason why it's big companies that are doing it is because when it in the realm of AI development and making sure that you have accuracy, greater amounts of data is never a bad thing. And you'll find that that's a lot of the reason why long dead social media websites that still have a large amount of metadata are still functioning, because they're still selling it. In large part because firms like to be fed information. The fact that it is the largest technology firms doing this is no surprise whatsoever. The secondary point is that this issue is greater than traditional multinationals under the American umbrella. If anything, a lot of our largest multinational corporations largely behave autonomously in a way that we worry about them acting as bad independent actors more than bad actors associated with governments. As time moves on, you're going to see a replication of the technological successes of things like Facebook and Google in other countries. And there's going to be limited barriers in some of those nations with regards towards the information technological firms that develop. Also, since you're able to sell information, even relatively small nations, small state actors, are still able to purchase AI models developed in far more advanced and numerous systems. So one thing to be concerned about would be either an Indian or a Chinese information technology firm developing tools that we might be able to stop domestically, and then selling those tools towards less than favorable regimes. And we're starting to see that even now, in particular in Iran, but we are also starting to see this in the UAE, in Saudi Arabia, and other regimes that are not exactly the most friendly for a traditional understanding of human rights. So we need to find a way to shift the conversation on big technology and AI firms away from an autarkic national perspective, because it might be very doable to deal with this problem in a purely domestic sphere, but it becomes increasingly difficult the more actors you throw in. And time seems to be inclined to allow for a greater proliferation of those actors, particularly as a large number of nations that have since been the recipient of information technological benefits from the outside begin to increasingly develop domestic nascent capabilities to pursue this on their own.
Right, because it seems to be that it doesn't take that much effort and funds in order to get, you could say, a prototype of an AI model that's developed, let's say here in the U.S., because of course, in Silicon Valley, that's where a lot of that stuff gets developed, and then as you say, the Middle Eastern countries could use that. I mean, like, are there any specific examples that you could think of? Because I mean, obviously, in the popular discourse in the U.S., we know that the Russian government has used trolls to influence U.S. voters and to tip the scales in favor of Donald Trump. But
I would be a little bit hesitant about that. And the reason why I would be a little bit hesitant about that is because we have a lot of evidence that interference is taking place.
yeah,
The degree to which we want to say that the influence has met real outcomes is perhaps something we should show restraint towards. I understand.
I'm not going to be like the Clinton campaign manager here, so I'm not going to try to defend their claim purely. I mean, it's
Sure.
surely the case that there were a lot of domestic issues that were happening in the U.S. already, and all that the Russians could do was to pour more oil into the fire, essentially, right? But it's not. But I wouldn't necessarily say that they caused the fire, so to speak. So they didn't cause the Trump victory.
That
Uh,
would be that would be something that I'd be much more okay with.
yeah. So I just be very careful in that description. But I guess so. So I just cite that Russia and the U.S. elections because obviously that's uh, what at least the Democratic Party in Congress went crazy over, and so we could follow that theater. But you had a lot of examples of or I guess ideas about what's happening in the Middle East and Iran.
Yeah.
Um,
So,
and could you say a little bit more about those other cases?
well, right now it seems to be mostly in a state that's lacking maturity, but we do see the use of AI pattern recognition being used to identify protesters. So, a lot of censorship activity isn't really people looking at things anymore. It's models of pattern recognition in order to have certain elements of behavior highlighted to you. Um, so right now it's just a force multiplier. It's not necessarily something that is generating new things yet. It's just making it so that you need to hire fewer people to take care of this. So in the protest movements inside of Iran, you're seeing increasing use of general intelligence to recognize protesters. You're seeing increasing investment inside of their security apparatus from China. That's not really. Yeah, I think that's fine to say. Yeah, that's fine to say. You're seeing a lot of technological investment inside of the UAE. So the UAE is something that I would be particularly focused on if you're going to see the emergence of artificial intelligence blended in with domestic or international security programs. Um, if you want to take a look at the original originator, no, that's a little bit redundant. If you want to take a look at the first place that we started being worried about this, then there's really no better example than China. In particular, platforms like WeChat and Weibo. Uh, both of those are known and even a little bit notorious to have various forms of surveillance that is not entirely human based to detect what is seen as undesirable domestic elements. And this is particularly true in Xinjiang. Um, I don't think that I really need to say a whole lot about that because it's one of the more evident examples. You could also take a look at some work that's been done in Chinese active measures. They have been less than successful, which is one of the reasons why I'm so hesitant to say that these are working now. Because at the moment, they don't actually appear to be working. So there was a lot of PRC activity designed to disrupt elections in Taiwan. It was less than successful. So that's something to think about and to be relatively reassured by. At the moment, these things are best as a force multiplier. I've been saying that a couple of times now. I think that's showing my Johns Hopkins strategic studies credentials. What I'm saying when I'm saying that is you're able to accomplish more with fewer people, which is not exactly the most original thing in the world. But you can definitely see that.
Well, I guess that intersects with perhaps my concern about what does technological revolution mean to future of work and employment relations, and whether those job opportunities actually do exist. Uh, but but in your application, I mean, even you seem to see that, right? Where marketing techniques for companies or for governments, it's about identifying and incarcerating protesters. Um, that it's not very labor intensive. It seems to be, right, and that itself could be a concern. I mean, if I don't know. I mean, if people want to be, agents at CIA, FBI, or whatever, um, does it mean that those kinds of job opportunities are going to become scarcer as AI progresses?
Well, sort of, but also no. In large part because there's a continually expanding mission with regards towards security. It brings up the old adage, the military-industrial complex is expanding to meet the needs of the military-industrial complex. As in, you see a massive proliferation of bureaucracy. I forget the exact statistic, but it's something akin to 1 in 4 or 1 in 5 or 1 in 6 domestic government workers are either involved in things like the DoD, the Department of Defense. You don't say the DoD, you just say DoD, and various intelligence and security apparatuses. So the reason why I'm saying that, just to step back from that kind of banal point, is right now we have a lot of people trying to do too much, such that we are continuously encountering manpower shortages. But the thing about AI and why it's being increasingly used is that it allows for these people to then be freed up to do additional work. So what you're going to see is a whole lot more systems engineers, so that traditional work of government can be shifted around. And this includes ordinary domestic governance as well. But this needs to reach a certain point. As in, the defense establishment, what is called the military-industrial complex or the military-industrial congressional complex, the Iron Triangle, let's just go with the Iron Triangle, has a tipping point. We can't have every human being inside of the United States employed in a security apparatus. So we are at the point where things can still grow and expand, but yeah, at a certain point, we will run out of positions and abilities for people to really take on. I'm unsure the exact threshold for that, though, especially since one of the reasons why there's such a growing dependence upon certain technological force multipliers is the issue of the budget. So the United States spends a very large amount on defense, but if you take a look at it, almost every penny is used for things that would be described as essential. So right now we're facing potential budget cuts inside of the defense establishment. I know that quite a few people are angling for that one, at least a 10% reduction. So if you have Biden win and win big in 2020, just a couple months now, you would see a reduction. And when that reduction takes place, you're going to see people being laid off because they can't be afforded. The most expensive thing in government, the most expensive thing in defense, the most expensive thing, period, with regards towards firms, are people. That's part of the reason why there's such a growing reliance upon technologies that allow you to get more done with fewer people. So if you take a look at Amazon, or that's actually not even the best example. What's the best example? Who's the Wizard of Omaha's name? Buffett.
Buffett, or Warren Buffett, yes.
Warren Buffett. I was going to say William Buffett, but I thought that was a terribly wrong thing. So Warren Buffett. If you take a look at his firm, it makes an obscene amount of money, but it has almost no people in it. I think
it's a holding company, right? So it's not that Berkshire Hathaway directly employs all of these people at Coca-Cola and whatever, like a dozen other firms. It also has like huge stake in Walmart, right? So traditional companies. So basically, anybody who's directly on the Berkshire Hathaway payroll but is not overseeing those other businesses that make the money, right? Like Coca-Cola. Um, I
True.
mean, I guess those are not like the Berkshire people. Uh, is just a small part of the whole empire. Is I guess what I'm saying.
True. I was bringing that up because for the amount of money and the amount of work that does go through it, you would be expecting substantially larger amounts of people. Not to the extent that it would be competing with the other various parts of the empire, as you called it, but you would still expect a fairly substantial amount of people, particularly for the types of analysis work that's being done. For instance, Buffett isn't investing in the current economic system, or at least he wasn't a few months ago. But the ultimate point that I'm trying to drive at is fewer people are required to do specific tasks, which means that for things that allow for an continuously expanding role, for instance, a government that wants to do more but can't under its means, AI isn't something that will result in an elimination of work. But for firms that specialize in one or two things, or an identifiable, predictable amount of things, you're going to see fewer and fewer people employed in them.
Yeah.
Middle management is going to go away. Analysts are going to go away. For the most part, you're going to have people who bootstrap AIs and make sure they work functionally, and the people who are increasingly unqualified to judge the products of AI, such that they make decisions, but their decisions may not actually be quote unquote correct. It's simply the fact that at the moment, or probably forever, but at the moment, these tools are still ultimately subordinated to owners of capital and owners and managers of capital. So yeah, you're going to see reductions there, which leads us to your favorite project.
Yeah. So if you let's take the example of the security establishment or the Warren Buffett companies, where you have, let's say, massive increases in productivity and efficiency, if that's what you want to call it, because of AI. But the associated implication of mass unemployment or technological unemployment, which is what people have been fearful of for the last almost 100 years since John Maynard Keynes, um, but has not happened, and so and then you ask yourself, well, why has it not happened? And I mean, the most convincing account I encountered was by David Graeber, who says that you have a proliferation of so-called bullshit jobs, right? Which are, I mean, I've like my former advisor in undergrad, Randall Collins, uh, used to write about this in the 70s. And he called it like the Sinecure Society. And he was, I guess he was particularly targeting higher education, right? Arguing that, the credentials that we're getting, the PhDs and whatever, aren't actually supposed to create any direct value to society, right? It's supposed to sort of, I don't know, entertain the people, right? Keep
That's
them
a
out of the
little bit
labor
too
market.
materialist.
Uh, yeah, but it's a very harsh kind of critique, but and we'll talk about higher education in a bit, but I guess the broader point being here that so sinecure is a term from, I believe it's like Middle Ages, right, where uh, like feudal retinue would be another term, right, where basically the feudal lord, uh, his status, and it's mostly his, there's very few females back then in power, his power would be defined by the number of people who follow him and who clean up after him, right? Like the number of servants, the number of cooks, the number of drivers, and all sorts of things that the Lord thinks that he needs, right?
Yeah, traditional
Around him,
patronage.
right? But then a lot of the sinecure, patronage receivers, it also includes people who are almost by definition non-productive. And of course, if you go back in the Middle Ages, I mean, well, what do you mean by productive? I mean, 90% of the population were farmers, were peasants. Right? So the fact that you produce food, that's sort of the most direct application of being a producer. And then, of course, you have a smaller group of artisans, merchants. And then, of course, with bourgeois revolution, that latter group, the artisans and the merchants, the traders, becomes more numerous. Professionals, came out of the guilds. Um, but then, so the idea is that as time goes on, the number and the proportion in the workforce that is sinecure, right, is just for you could say ornamental reasons inside of large corporations and government bureaucracies. Using the security establishment here as example. That sort of has been a continuous trend, and I think it means a lot. I mean, in terms of like meaning of work, right? If people are going to their job, and firstly, do they actually recognize that their job is sinecure, right? Is ornamental, and if they do recognize it, what does it mean in terms of their well-being, in terms of the satisfaction? Because I mean, I would imagine that it would be, very, depressing to be sort of stuck in that, in the telos of a world where, in order to justify your economic existence, right, your right to a boat, your right to food and stuff, you have to sort of sell your labor to somebody, right? Um, and yeah, I think this is a very spiritually damaging situation that we're in, and I have a feeling that automation is going to make that worse and not better. Do you have a take on this?
I agree that we are talking about a redefinition of what is productivity. So I remember one of the critiques of the shift to the service-based economy was that nations were going from industrial societies that were producing tangible assets to companies that produced nothing. I first heard that critique with regards towards the closing of the coal mines in Thatcherite Britain. And I feel as though that type of criticism is contingent upon a traditional understanding of what productivity and labor is. Because a lot of what is part of this sinecure style production are the very things that populate museums, are the very things that are played in concert halls. So almost all of the major Renaissance paintings were a product of nobility sponsoring artists whose product fed no people, at least not in a physical sense, and provided nothing but an ornamental, what's the right word? complement to already stable structures. So when you go into the Sistine Chapel and take a look around, you can wonder whether or not any of the pieces of art enhance the building. If you go from the perspective of you are looking at the functional product of the architecture, there's almost no benefit to paintings and sculptures and carefully molded buttresses. All you really require is the functional structure. I believe right now we are entering into a phase in our society whereby the functional structure is largely taken care of. And it's being taken care of by fewer and fewer people.
Right, so 1.6% of the population in agriculture, 7% in manufacturing, and that's the base of our society. And of course, you have the necessary service sector. I mean, I think we want our kids to be educated, so I think the teachers are required. We want our COVID patients to be taken care of, so I don't think anybody's going to take issue with nurses and doctors. There's a list of occupations in the service sector you can go through, but I would say about half of our population is employed in the sector where, if they did not exist, it wouldn't be a social disaster, right?
I mean, yes, but therein lies a little bit of someone's deciding to mow their lawn. In any case, if we're going to make a broader point about this, there is a different style of production. So would society collapse if no one produces any more artwork? No. Would society collapse if not another book was ever written, not another academic article published, not another advancement in science? No, not really. Our society would be very far from collapsing, and given the sheer amount of surplus, we would either enter into a pretty rapid deflationary period, or we would have large redistributive networks in order to ensure that people are able to receive their goods in order to survive. But at the same time, society seems a little bit poorer without it.
But so Dennis, I mean, I just sorry for the interruption, but I think it's important to make a distinction here and be fair to the Graeber's argument here. So I don't think that artists and scientists and architecture, sculptor, and so the creative arts, I don't think he was targeting those people as being BS, right? I think he's sort of oriented at the sort of middle management, bureaucracy. I think his examples were corporate lawyers, advertising executives, things like that. Vision coordinators was one of his favorite examples.
Okay. All right. That makes sense. I suppose I was focusing too much on the societal collapse bit.
Yeah, so arts and sciences, I think, I don't think he would consider that as BS. I mean, in fact, the very fact that he's an anthropologist and that his chosen profession is to, basically a Westerner going to, less developed countries, less developed, you could say tribal communities and studying them.
Mm-hmm.
Because Graeber used to do his doctoral work, I think, in Madagascar. He studied indigenous communities there. But I think he would have appreciation for the fact that what he himself and others are doing is useful, at least to themselves, right? And I think that's very important to say about what's the bullshit job? It's only if you think it is bullshit, right? So if you're like an artist or a scientist and you think what you do and write and compose.
So you need to self-identify as working in a profession that adds no value?
Yes, I think that's what he.
I would dramatically disagree with the 50%. I would say that very few people actually believe that their labor is meaningless. So take middle management positions, for instance. They're being wiped out due to technological advancement, but from my experience, people in middle management tend to believe that they are playing a vital role in ensuring the continued success of their company. There's a certain amount of ownership, not the least because people in middle management still nurture ideas about promotion. So the fact that they are in that position and they're spending God knows how many hours, they're unlikely to believe that their roles are meaningless. And I know this because I know a few people who work in middle management. As for vision coordinators, I can't actually tell you. I don't know any vision coordinators or visionaries for companies. I'm going to assume it has something to do with marketing business strategy, but I don't really know.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say that, like, like, I guess our formal position as academics would be that we are a little bit in the artist category. We have a lot of autonomy. We choose our own research subject, and we allocate our own time, right?
Mm-hmm.
Schedule autonomy. So I mean, a lot of these things that sort of make us really happy, right? And also justify the low salary, because demand and supply, right? You have a high supply of those kinds of people. Um, I think that our experiential world as academics somewhat shield us from taking this bullshit job concept seriously. But I mean, but then if you say, well, then what about those people, who are vision coordinators? The survey, I think a YouGov poll that was done in the Netherlands and in the UK, said that 37%, 37 to 40%, of the survey respondents believed that their job was meaningless, right? And I think that's substantial. Now, obviously, I don't think that within those 40% you will find, academics, musicians, artists, or even like doctors, I don't know, even truck drivers. Even truck drivers might think that, keeping the global economy going by transporting cargo. I think they will. I think even they will recognize that, right? But then, if you think about, again, where automation is targeted at. I mean, if you stick with a truck driver, I mean, I just saw this article recently. It was about self-driving trucks. I mean, of course, it's been a discussion for the last 5-6 years now, but you can definitely see how this is being ramped up to the point where they only want to have the driver as somebody who monitors the truck, right? But not somebody who is driving the truck. And then in the later iteration, what they want to do, by they I mean the whatever AI self-driving truck developers, what they want to do is to only have the truck staffed during moments of loading and unloading, right? So it's only the beginning bit and then the end bit, right? And I don't know. I mean, for me, that sounds like a huge job cut that's about to be expected. Now, the trucking industry says, well, it's great anyway because we have a labor shortage, right? So we don't find enough people in those sectors anyway. Like their claim to make. But yeah, I think that the drive towards automation and what it means to overall jobs, yeah, that connection is uncertain because of the existence of sinecure positions.
What that reminds me of are airplane pilots. most planes don't actually require a whole lot of human interaction anymore. The pilot is mostly there in case something goes wrong and to assist in landing and taking off. So I think we would all feel incredibly uncomfortable going into a plane that didn't have a pilot. I have the suspicion that while we will have self-driving cars, that probably within the first few years of their development, you will find state or federal governments mandating the presence of at least one driver to be present in case something goes wrong, or to override the AI in case the AI makes a mistake. Because AIs are not foolproof. They will probably make far less mistakes than human beings, but it's always good to have a failsafe, particularly if there's a problem with the sensor somewhere. If the input data isn't properly being analyzed, then you could enter into a conceivably very bad scenario. So it's always good to have someone who can at least see out the window and hit the brake. But I understand exactly what you're getting at, though, because the ultimate point that we're building towards is that the amount of work that is traditionally meaningful is in decline. The capacity for reinvention into new forms of labor, be it creative or be it inherently worthless, is changing. So the old promise of technological advancement is, as we progress forward and engage in creative destruction, there will be economic opportunities for those who but those who are displaced by this economic transformation. I am very sympathetic to the idea that we are going to reach a point whereby people will no longer be able to rely upon a transformation of labor such that they are still able to work into the future. I think that we will eventually reach a tipping point, much like what I mentioned a little bit earlier with defense work or government work, whereby our tools will become refined enough that we require few enough people that we will enter into a situation whereby many people will have no real means to procure work in a traditional sense, which means that at that point they are at the mercies of the expenditures of excess capital on the part of people who are still employed in very meaningful work. And I mean that in an economically productive sense. Mm-hmm. Because if you go to places like Silicon Valley, there is a reason why the average housing cost is as expensive as it is. There's a truly obscene amount of concentrated wealth that goes into these locations, and they're then dispersed through their people, but they aren't dispersed in a way that is geographically uniform. They're dispersed in locales. So there are entire industries of obscene wealth being generated from the leftovers of even more obscene wealth in urban environments where the tech center exists. Yeah. And this doesn't quite have a distribution that is even, well, let's kill even. Even doesn't exist. Even has never existed with regards towards capital disbursement. Yeah. That's a Pareto distribution. But what you see is that certain areas of the country are typically the recipients of capital, and they recover faster from economic declines. So job growth and job retention is being increasingly geographically isolated, such that the rest of the country is largely not in a state of absolute destitution, but in stagnation and relative decline. And as this relative decline progresses, you're going to find fewer and fewer ways for these people to actively participate in a way that is truly meaningful to themselves. And that is where I would go far more than middle management, because that's a far more structural, far more insurmountable problem without very intense intervention. And there's no real guarantee that interventions that are targeted will necessarily work either, which is why something like UBI is very seductive. Because if all you're doing is providing that excess capital, and excess capital is perhaps not the right word, but the generated surplus capital that is occurring inside of very wealthy sectors of the economy, and allowing that to be distributed to every citizen of an adult age, certainly allows for a bootstrapping of traditional models of economic development. So you could that's it's a very capitalist solution to the problem of people no longer being able to find employment in a traditional sense. Because at that point, you're going to find people who are able to be subsistent upon UBI, but not entirely comfortable, so that people will then feel encouraged to go forth and engage in some type of activity that they want to engage in. That is either productive or they just want to. I mean, I'm sure plenty of people, if they have enough to live, will just stay at home and garden. And there's no real problem with that because a lot of the incentive to work is being taken away from them. The essential component to the broader economy is being increasingly handled by increasingly fewer people.
Yeah.
So that the marginal returns towards joining those type of labor forces is in decline, and in large part, it's impossible. So do you think a lot of these places that are experiencing economic decline wouldn't jump at the opportunity to work if they could?
Yeah, so here I think it's very important to analyze the sort of assumptions that we have about people. So, sort of like this Puritan slash neoclassical economic perspective, which is quite dominant, right? Which is that people are only going to work if they don't have other sources of income, which means that you have to make unemployment insurance time limited, and you don't want people to sit around. Which, I mean, it's a pretty crazy thing to say during a pandemic, even though I still have heard it from some Republican politicians, because people are in fact losing their jobs because people don't want to go out, if the virus is circulating, right? So that of course cuts back on the service sector jobs there. But it's sort of, and then also the Puritan ideology, which is that you're only a valuable member in society if you pursue wage work, and so the way how I would qualify this is, yes, people do want to contribute positively to society, but it doesn't have to be wage work, right? So, I mean, if I say, for instance, that I would like to tutor, I don't know, let's say low-income kids, to teach them math, something like that, which I've not done, so I'm not going to say I'm a saint here, but let's say if I said I was going to do this, right? And the idea that I wouldn't necessarily want to charge these kids because they don't have much money anyway. Yet they would be the ones who would receive the biggest, you could say, marginal benefit for teaching them, because if you're like a upper middle class kid, chances are that the public school that you attend has such a high quality that you don't need extra help. So those kinds of like volunteer kind of activities, care work activities, I think they would be valued upwards, if we had a universal basic income. So I think that's the important element about which, in the sort of Puritan neoclassical frame, tends to get neglected. And then just two more things that I wanted to say about inequality that you mentioned here. So I always like to compare Facebook with like a mom and pop store, like a local pizza shop, because when people say that we need to have the free market, and you shouldn't be socialist, you shouldn't do redistribution and all that nonsense. I would like to say that, the big difference between Facebook and the mom and pop store is the scale. I mean, when does it ever happen that you have a billion, no, actually 2 billion customers using one company, using one service? Like if I have like a pizza shop, and I'd be really happy to sell, let's say 50, 60 pizzas a day, and that might be just enough to pay all of the bills. And that's clearly, that's where the inequality is, right? Where you can have all of the money flowing into Silicon Valley because you have such a huge number of people concentrated in that one service. And then the second thing, when you mentioned the effects of inequality, I mean, it was yesterday on Facebook I shared the CDC statistics on drug deaths, which reached 75,000 last year, I think, something like that. So it was 70,000. And that's a horrendous figure. I mean, I mean, we know the COVID is like 140,000. It's also a pretty bad number, and it's rising. But the fact that, like, even prior to the pandemic, there's so many people who think that their life is essentially worthless. I mean, it's only if you think it's worthless that start taking drugs and start to neglect your health. So yeah, so that to me is a huge indication for why it is that we need to inject economic stimulus into desperate and poor communities. But it's not just economics, because it's also about moral value, right? It's like the idea that once I have basic economic security, Andrew Yang, who's a UBI proponent, used the analogy of taking the boot off the throat of people, right? Which they have at the moment. So, and once you take that boot off the throat, I think that we can finally, you could say, fully share in the advantages of of the capitalist economic system. And so I agree with you that that UBI is actually it's sort of like a pro-capitalistic approach, and so I think it's absolutely needed to have a UBI, and I mean, I'm sure there's other things that we should look at as well. I mean, I'm not saying that let's just do UBI and then let's retreat the welfare state, which is the Charles Murray position, a very conservative position. But I would say it would be a big starting point.
Oh, I definitely agree with that. I suppose. I mean, I agree with what you're saying. I do want to push back a little bit on the drug overdose statistic. I know they're typically referred to as deaths of despair, but there are plenty of people who are involved in a situation whereby they fall into it and no longer have control. So at a certain point, you would expect some amount of those overdoses to be simple helplessness, not necessarily despair, not necessarily a desire for death, because I think it might be a bit of a stretch to associate all of that with something akin to suicide. But I understand the point, and is very well taken. The opioid epidemic, there's a more insidious benzo epidemic that's also going on. There is far too many problems associated with drugs that is intrinsically tied to the health of the economy. In large part because when you see people becoming dependent upon these types of medications, oftentimes they're going to a local doctor that is perhaps overworked or can't really take too much time to focus on any individual patient. And the patient themselves might be overworked to the point where they will only go to a doctor if they absolutely have to. So if they're given a pill that helps them a little bit, their response is, I'll just keep taking it, and then when things start getting bad, I'll just start taking more of it. Abuse of prescription drugs is wildly out of proportion, and it's only growing. It has only been growing. So I agree with highlighting the statistic. I'm pushing back. I'm not really pushing back all that hard. With regards to the inequality of tech firms, you use the pizza shop and the Facebook shop. I think that's actually really useful for illustrating the fundamental problem in not Milton Friedman. What's his name? The other one. The guy who wrote The World is Flat.
Thomas Friedman.
Thomas Friedman. So he wrote a book for the listeners in the audience, I suppose. He wrote a book stating that globalization and information technologies were essentially flattening the supply chain and the logistics chain such that the world was essentially flat when it came towards economic opportunity or development. That's very, very cheap, dramatically oversimplified description of a book.
By flat, he means equal, right?
Yeah, something
more equal
like
chances. Yeah,
more equal. So, that's a terrible reduction of a book that's like 400 pages long, 300 pages long, but that's the upshort of it. The fundamental critique that I think we're uncovering is geography may be largely dead for things like the internet, but it's not dead for the comparative advantage of physical goods, which is why you're seeing massive inflows of capital to information firms, but you're seeing limited distribution beyond those sectors because physical goods travel less far because there are more barriers towards its movement. It needs to go through more hands. If I send you an email, it doesn't really matter that we're states apart. If I send you mail, it is a testimony to the U.S. Postal Service that you receive it. But if I were to bring you a pizza, not only would it be cold, it might start to be getting rather moldy by the time I bring it to you.
And I think very far away.
Oh yeah, I'm pretty far away from you. Yeah, I'm up in Massachusetts. Where are you?
Yeah. I'm in New Jersey and Princeton.
I knew that. But the point behind that is there's a certain time sensitivity and a certain amount of geographical barriers that need to be overcome for the transmission of physical goods. And even though we have transitioned largely to a service-based economy, most of those services still center either directly with or around physical services. For instance, if I am a hairdresser, you still need to get into my shop. If I am giving you a pizza, I still need to have the ability to send the delivery boy to you. If I am a waiter, you still need to come to my restaurant so I can give you things at a table. There's a proliferation of wealth associated with the information sector that is vastly outproportioned to the physical parameters of people behaving and providing services. So even your middle management people, there's a limit to that. Telecommuting work might be on the rise, dramatically so, but you still can't telecommute haircuts. We're experimenting with telecommuting things like doctor's visits, which I actually think is fantastic, because if the only thing you need is a stable internet connection in order to gain access to high quality healthcare, or at the very least high quality doctors, then we are poised to see a lot of real benefits. But yeah, you get what I'm saying with that. So the solution, I'm not really So I definitely get the idea of people who say that you can then dismantle the welfare state if you have UBI. I think it's flawed. UBI needs to be fairly substantial in order to justify cutting other forms of welfare. As in, I still am a firm believer in, if not universal health care in the form of a no private option, then at the very least there should be a minimum basic health care option available to people. That means that you don't die because you cannot pay. Very much in favor of that, and I'm not sure UBI alone would solve that, because when you give people the ability to choose what to do with their money, they might not choose to buy insurance, which is why plenty of states require you to buy insurance for your car or for your health if you're engaged in a certain type of economy. So you can't drive a car without car insurance, at least not in Massachusetts.
Yeah, so to be clear here, so I mean, I agree that we need to combine single payer healthcare with UBI. And now, so the critics, I mean, and I know that I have a few new liberal friends on Facebook. I'm not going to name these people now, but some people might know who I'm talking
I
about.
mean, you can
Uh,
name them. Aren't we supposed to
but
talk to them later on?
uh, perhaps, but so they argue essentially that you have too much spending, government federal spending on UBI, and which is about maybe say 2.5 to 3 trillion, and then you have the health expenditure, which would be another, let's say, I think maybe 2 trillion a year. And I think what those critics of federal spending don't take into account is that so a lot of the money is we're already spending it, right? It's just about how you're spending it. So I mean, so with UBI, you need to, you know, draw in some extra revenues. So whether it's a value-added tax or wealth tax or something like that, inheritance tax and things like that. But certainly the premise that single payer would be more expensive is simply not true, right? Because I mean, right now under the present system, if you're paying, let's say, 5,000, 6,000 a year on premiums, and then you have another 3 or 4 thousand on deductibles if you have health issues and stuff. So you're already spending upwards of 10,000 a year, on the health insurance. And if you had, you could say, a Medicare tax or a single payer tax, which is going to take off, let's say, 5,000. I mean, if you have a middle class salary, or right there, I mean, you're saving 50%, and also, the single payer plans would be what I would call robust insurance, which means that your deductibles will be eliminated, and your co-payments will also be maybe very low, but certainly not as high as today. So the net budget for an individual person, it's already positive, right? And the healthcare system would already become cheaper under single payer. It's just that from an accounting perspective, I mean, you shift the ledger from private employers and private individuals to the federal government. That's all that's happening, right? And of course, the total cost being less. And there will be losers under single payer, for sure. So it could be that doctors and nurses might be making slightly less than they do at present. But I mean, of course, it's not going to be much less. And because you'll be shifting a lot of them from the fee for service to a salary system, and then what would also happen is that the healthcare bureaucracy would be slimmed down dramatically. So all these people that work in these billing and coding departments, people who work in the insurance industry, all executives all the way down to the sort of representative sales reps. All of these jobs are going to be eliminated, right? And so I think there was an interview, I think 2008, 9, so right I think when Obama was running for president first time, and he was asked about single payer, and he says, "Yeah, okay, you're going to increase efficiency, but how many jobs are you going to cut? 1, 2, 3 million people." And then out of those 3 million people whose jobs have been cut out of the health bureaucracy, um, what do you want them to do, right? So he thought about, yeah, our system is highly inefficient. It kind of sucks. People spend too much money on healthcare, but you know, we want to preserve those 3 million, what I would call sinecure jobs in the healthcare bureaucracy. And I don't know. I mean, to me, it's somewhat unconscionable. I mean, I would say, why don't we just pony up a UBI, right? Give it to the health bureaucrats who are going to be laid off in the system, in the single payer system, and then we'll figure out, and then we'll help them figure out what they're going to do next if to pursue next employment. But to say that no, the healthcare bureaucracy jobs is what we have to preserve by all means. I mean, I just don't accept that position.
Have you ever watched a show called Yes, Minister?
Is it based in the UK?
Yes.
I'm familiar with the concept, but continue. Just explain.
So it is an old political sitcom, and there is an episode whereby they are discussing a hospital. The hospital has been constructed. It is fully staffed. But in the process of fully staffing the hospital and ensuring that it is the most well-run hospital in the local area, they neglected to hire any doctors or nurses and therefore have no patients. So there are 500 workers in a hospital that has neither any doctors or patients, and it is seen as a triumph inside of the bureaucracy. It was a rather funny episode. I really rather enjoyed it. I think it's either in season 1 or season 2 of Yes, Minister. There aren't very many episodes. You could probably find it on YouTube. But what you're describing reminds me of that, in large part because the healthcare sector as an employment field exists in order to service patients. And I believe one of the things that we have been losing sight of is what is the originating instigation behind a form of employment. And if the type of employment that is taking place is not actually serving the objective for it, that instead you have an emergent bureaucracy that exists to sustain itself, then something has really fundamentally gone wrong. And to continue with that a little bit, because it's worth continuing, I don't believe that it should be a fundamental consideration to maintain an employment sector at an overall net detriment to society. Now, that should be sending off warning flares in a whole bunch of people, including any potential future employers, and I apologize for that. But what I'm getting at is when you take a look at the healthcare sector itself, drugs are overpriced because there's the expectation that for most people, overpriced medications will be subsidized, in part by government industries and also by insurance. And I'm thinking particularly of a relatively recent drug that is supposed to help with coronavirus. It would cost something like $10 or $15 to produce, and it was being sold for hundreds, if not thousands of dollars. The expectation is that insurance will cover it, and that the various social welfare nets within the United States will partially subsidize it, so ordinary people can find it. But I don't actually think that that is a successful use of the healthcare sector. In large part, this is a critique that might actually be shared with some of your more neoconservative or neoliberal friends, in which part there is something akin to a cartel that exists inside of the healthcare sector that is supported by an understanding that no matter how much you charge, the people who need it will be able to find it, even if they'll be ruined by it. A large number of people aren't necessarily turned away for cancer or for heart disease. They are instead just put in so much debt that is partially subsidized that they have no ability to escape from it. That's a very bad situation. So overall, I would be concerned about simply providing healthcare if you don't actually deal with the underlying premise of, I don't want to call it price gouging, but it's pretty close to price gouging. There's a reason why you can import medications from Canada at a substantially cheaper rate. And it's illegal to do so. But a lot of people who were diabetics would travel to Canada to procure their medications, often at 1/10 of the cost, because if they didn't, there was a very real chance that they would go homeless trying to pay for it, if not die because they felt the need to forego taking insulin in order to maintain things like their mortgage, their house, their employment. So just because someone can pay for something, if they can't afford to pay for anything else, then the subsidization process has gone awry. So I'm very sympathetic towards that. I'm not entirely sympathetic towards a complete abolition of private health insurance, which seems to be where some people go with this. That's just taking too much and is unlikely to work. You'll just end up alienating people. So I wouldn't say that the health sector of the economy will go away. I would just say that it would be reduced. In large part, we need to find a way to negotiate on prices such that needed medications cannot be charged at a way that is conducive to their elasticity, because some medications will have price thresholds so high that it becomes prohibitively expensive, even with insurances. So I'm sure you're aware that plenty of people have insurances, but they have maximums. So we will help you cover $2,000 of any needed surgeries or medications, $10,000 of any needed surgeries or medications. And you're like, this sounds great. How am I ever going to spend $10,000 on medication? And the answer is, you haven't actually really been sick, because you can very easily be charged much more than that if you're in a severe condition. So yeah, I am a fan of a public option, but I think there's something deeper there that needs to be fully disaggregated, disentangled, and to a certain extent we need to stop subsidizing bad behavior and start trying to find a way to renegotiate a more sustainable future. Because a lot of the reason why it's just so cheap to have healthcare in other countries is because that type of behavior isn't really allowed, as in it's dramatically reduced even. Imagine producing medications at cost is sort of isn't really going to work. But producing medications and selling them at above cost to maintain the incentive, allowing a patent to be kept for a couple of years before it goes generic, you can still have a thriving pharmaceutical sector at that point. So this is rambling a little bit, but there's something there that makes the problem more, and I have some ideas, but let's face it, I'm a policy I'm a growing policy professional, but I'm not in healthcare policy. Let's put it that way. I know enough to know that there's a problem, but not enough to really know a solution.
Yeah, I mean, so just with respect to the drug innovation, that's usually the neoliberal argument, right? That you need to have this you could say, inefficient and inhumane American healthcare system in order to produce the new drugs. Because what oftentimes happens is that, you could say there's freeloading happening where the Canadian, European, Japanese health systems import American drugs. And of course, those single-payer health systems, they do negotiate the drug prices, and they do make bulk purchases, which makes it often cheaper. But then oftentimes then what happens effectively is that U.S. taxpayers and U.S. patients pay for basically the vast majority of the drug development costs. And well, my response to that is, that you would have to deal with the issue of like drug innovation a different way, which means, I would say you would have to create like an international consortium, right? Maybe run out of the United Nations and the World Health Organization, even though, I mean, among some people in the administration, WHO is a very dirty word at this point. But and then you would sort of, you could say, multilaterally fund drug research. Obviously, the vast majority of it will be borne by the U.S. taxpayers because the U.S. is the biggest economy in the world still. But at least to some extent you could sort of share the costs. And then the second related point, I mean, did you see the research by Mariana Mazzucato? I think the book is Entrepreneurial State.
Sure.
And so the whole point that she makes is that all of the things, or a lot of the things that we value technologically, right? I guess internet is the main example, but also pharmaceutical drugs is another example. Have been developed by U.S. government spending, right? So it's already the collective, right, the taxpayers, which is funding a lot of these innovations in the first place. If you compare the NIH budgets, National Institute of Health, and then I think there's like maybe like half a dozen agencies or so that deal with this. I would say that their spending is a lot higher than what you find in Canada or the European countries, right? So there already is like a heavy investment on the drug research side in the US from the public sector, and not from the private sector. So if we were to, you could say, mess up with the private sector to some extent, I don't think it's necessarily going to destroy drug innovation. Because you have to think like, so what the private drug sector can do really well, maybe better than the public sector, is you could say mass production, mass marketing, and mass distribution, right? Those are the three areas that the private drug sector, pharmaceutical sector is doing really well. But I think but I wouldn't overestimate the sort of the innovation element, where I think public investments are absolutely crucial. And yeah, but still, I mean, I for the fairness of the American people who shouldn't be bankrupted by medical and pharmaceutical bills, there has to be price negotiations. And price negotiations, of course, means price controls ultimately, and then and then you can sort of take care of people's needs much better. I mean, this idea, like, I mean, so every day, I mean, if you look for it, I mean, on the Facebook wall, you might be able to find it. Is a headline of 27-year-old diabetic died because he or she rationed insulin, right? And it's like every day you can read about these cases, right? I mean, and every time you read about it, I mean, of course, it's supposed to outrage you. I mean, that's sort of the power of social media to keep you addicted to it, right? It's outrage. Um, but I mean, but that's like a form of cruelty, right? Done to the people in this country, which I think it can and it should be avoided. I mean, this whole idea of like, oh, we're only gonna have, you know, a healthcare system so that we can serve the pharmaceutical companies' needs and interests. Uh, I, I don't see a positive point there. Uh, but anyway, so should we take this into a different direction now? I mean,
Entirely up to you.
yeah, yeah. Well, so yeah, so about this last point with regard to the uh, Facebook stuff. I mean, there are certainly issues with getting with keeping people engaged on the platform by through negative emotions, right? And
Yeah.
I believe there was like this Facebook experiment where they tried out like positive messaging to people and then negative messaging, and then they find that the negative messaging, seeing things like the insulin death, or or usually the big thing that's happening, of course, the death of George Floyd, right, which was captured on video. So examples of police brutality, uh, which can then lead to, you could call it a social explosion, right? Um, and that's the power of social media. I mean, is that something that you see as beneficial? I mean, or is that actually uh, has some concerning prospects?
Oh, it has tremendous concerning prospects. So let me think for a moment. You are right to reference that study. It does exist. Not only are not only did we discover that putting forward particular imagery to people affected their average emotional response, we were able to discover that things that make you angry and things that make you fearful are far more likely to spread than things that make you happy. And that is a one-way ticket to hell when you put that to its furthest possible conclusion. Because it means that stories that would indicate hope are in a losing battle with stories that are designed to prey upon your fears. So earlier you mentioned the stories of every day you're able to see someone who died because of rationing of medication. Those stories are out there, but their placement is an editorial comment. Every story you see is, in a sense, selected because it allows for you to interact with it. Everyone trains their algorithms. If you go on YouTube and you watch videos, your recommended feed is a very particular thing. And that is true for certain elements of Facebook, not just ads, but also more than that. I don't want to go too far down that road because at one point I got into an argument with someone saying that it also influenced search results. I was told that that was incorrect, but then I also saw some conflicting data there, so I'm going to put that into a box. I'm going to put that into the box of I don't really know. But what I will say is that when it comes to the spreading of information, even purely organically, like hashtags on Twitter, you'll see a general trend towards things that are meant to make you angry, things that are meant to make you fearful. That is not how you create a functioning society. And I believe that there's a very strong argument to be made that narrative competition between those things which make us fearful are leading to a fundamental breakdown of communal sense making on a national basis, particularly with regards towards politics, which is definitely dual use for how I introduced myself in this conversation. I am very concerned, not for the now, but for the future of these technologies. So no, I do not believe that those developments are a good thing. I mean, I can understand why some people might say so, because if you did not have access to an aggregator that was designed to give you such forms of information, you would be forgiven for thinking that those types of stories were concealed from you. Let's face it, most major newspapers can't afford to cover a story about some hapless person who fell into ruin and died many states over. They might occasionally do a long-form story on data because they kind of have to. Once a story reaches a certain threshold, it will be published. But individual deaths, unless you're particularly noteworthy, are never covered anywhere. Not unless you're a famous person, so you get an obituary, or it is the instigating point for a communal sense of outrage. And I think you're finding that now with recent police fatalities. It's not so much that police fatalities don't occur, they occur fairly frequently. It's just that when events occur fairly frequently, you just need to set a timer. And the timer is, in a few months to a year, you're going to have a story like this. So you just need to wait. And then once it happens, you are then able to take a catalyzing event and have it turn into a wildfire. Because once people are exposed to it, it will spread because it will make you angry. And then the reaction to that is always a little bit poorer, but it's still fundamentally important towards the sustainability of communal outrage. So if everyone tomorrow said that, yes, this death was obscene and there was no benefit in the types of procedures that allowed for it to occur, and that we should change the accountability structures such that this can never happen again. If everyone said that and something was done about it, then you'd expect a story like this to die almost right away. There's a needed component towards the perpetuation of a sustainable narrative, and that is its adversary. So adversarial information networks. And this adversarial relationship are those people who view events like these with suspicion. There are certain elements of conspiracy theorism that goes behind this, but I believe the far more prominent focus are those types of people that take exemption to specific parts of the narrative that propels forward advocacy against this type of event from happening. And a lot of that has to do with sub-arguments. So if everyone's just saying that no one should really have a knee on someone until they stop breathing and die, very few people are going to object. The moment you start saying that this is a sign of America's innate sin of white supremacy, that everyone, if they are not against white supremacy, are in some ways complicit with white supremacy, then you're going to find those people who don't really object to the tragedy of one man's death, but will reject to the carrying arguments that put it forward. And once that starts happening, you find the very arguments that helped lead to the scheduling of this podcast. Because it's very easy to fall into confusion when you aren't really addressing the key point. You're addressing sub-points that are meant to buttress the key argument. So any instigating narrative that is meant to convey a political point of advocacy will have multiple layers to it, and will have multiple groups supporting it. And if you're able to amplify, again, those things that make you angry, those things that make you fearful, if you're able to amplify a minority voice or a minority position in a broader advocacy-based group, and you're able to make it seem larger than it is, then you're able to convince those people that are opposed to this more radical or this more unacceptable subposition, you're able to galvanize them against that subposition, and then you're able to create a substitution effect. This allows for some people to say that anyone protesting in a Black Lives Matter event are, what's the buzz term? Marxists, postmodern neo-Marxists. That one, the one that shows up all the time. That is fundamentally untrue. But you will find some people engaging inside of the broader protest movement that certainly carry those beliefs. So if you're someone who sees what they want to see and hears what they want to hear, then you're able to take a voice, maybe 4 or 5 voices out of hundreds, and you're able to say that those people are the ones that I oppose. Now, if you have an objective distance from the actual event, you can say that, okay, these positions are perhaps undesirable, but the broader movement is making a good point. It is built around some mutually understandable objectives, and that we should try to oppose that. That's the distance-bearing point. It's the, yes, there are crazies, but the crazies aren't the movement. Don't get confused. But you know how you get access to those stories about that one person who dies because they're unable to afford their medication? People who are clued into specific forms of adversarial information structures will be continually clued into acts of violence or obscene political opinions carried by a minority of a group, allowing for them to develop an impression that the movement itself is fundamentally destructive. And this is partially why you will find a growing suspicion of Black Lives Matter. I think that one of the greatest triumphs of it after the death of Floyd was that almost everyone was supporting it. There was a 20 to 30% approval rating gap for the first time almost since its beginning, or ever. I forget which. It was either the first time in years or the first time ever. But I don't think that that's going to continue. I think that's going to start to decline, and it's going to start to decline fast. So the problem is, how do we prevent that type of adversarial nature with regards towards information and advocacy from spiraling out of control?
Well, it seems to be that there's something in the format inside of the social media which makes it not amenable to have a peaceful resolution, right? Because so what social media does is it democratizes voice, which we think, I mean, like our gut instinct might be it's a good thing, right? because people who were disenfranchised and who don't have much to say are now are given, because they have a Facebook account or they have a Twitter account. They now have some influence, but then so that's you could call it the benefit maybe of democratization, right?
Well,
But
that's the
then
hope.
right, yeah, but then the cost of it is that there's a potential for, you could, as you say, the people with the crazy viewpoints, and whether it's on the extreme left or extreme right. I mean, so we're not gonna play favorites here.
Sure.
It, for the extreme voices to sort of become amplified, and and then we have a distorted perception, right? Because the reality is that the majority opinion is, you could say, I mean, I would just call it the reasonable position, right?
Yes.
I mean, so the reasonable position in the case of police violence would be that you're opposed to racism, you're opposed to police violence, um, but you are also against abolish police, right? So you want to have like a robust police force that protects you against crime in your neighborhood, right? So I think that's sort of, you could say, the reasonable, moderate, position, and I think the vast majority of people would subscribe to these positions. But then, well, because you give everybody, a platform, right, to speak. Um, that, and then, well, who gets to win in social media? Well, it's the people who scream the loudest. Well, so then the people who scream the loudest are the ones who have the most extreme opinions. And then, of course, for anybody who then interacts in the social media platform, they then get distorted impression of the reality, right?
Oh, definitely. And just one thing to tack on to that before you move on to a different point is that the amplification of extreme voices is often as much to do with the adversary as it is to do with the internal position. When you go on Facebook, I don't think that you're sharing a whole lot of articles about Chaz falling apart or various defund movements that don't just say we should reallocate some resources, but instead say, look at all the money we'd have if no cops existed. You aren't really sharing those type of articles, but perhaps your more conservative friends will be sharing those articles, but they'll be sharing someone critiquing the extreme position. In the same way that you might find someone who's willing to share a critique of an extreme right-wing position. It's not really that people are even allowing for the amplification of voices in their own camps necessarily, although there is some of that. I don't want to say that that doesn't exist. It's that there's a reciprocal relationship with the other that allows for the amplification of these voices, such that even if no one, no city, no mayor, no representative, no senator was putting forward the idea of a complete abolition of the police department, you would still find a substantial amount of people among conservative circles highlighting those events. It's also very similar with the type of editorial things that are selected. So I have multiple circles that I walk in. When I'm with some of my more progressive circles, I am confronted and bombarded with imagery of police violence and brutality. Because that is the imagery that sells the most. Because it allows for you to develop the most fearful or rage-inducing opinion about the group that you're trying to reform or oppose, depending on how you view it. Now I want you to do a switch. The people that you were arguing with earlier, what do you think they see? What do you think that they highlight? They are not highlighting images of police brutality. they're denying it even exists. At least they're denying it exists to the extent that would merit the activity that's been taking place. Instead, what you'll find are things that don't even really seem relevant to you. But due to the nature of the positions that they see, they're highly relevant to them. Because you aren't really talking to each other. You're talking past each other to the straw men that are constructed. So when you say, that's not really what we believe, there's a disconnect. As in, people don't actually really have that click. They might say, well, maybe you think that, but that's just a sign that you don't really know the full position of the people that you're on the side of. That you are the minority sensible voice, and what you should be doing instead is really getting to know the true voice of the movement that you're associated with.
Yeah.
Which is just, it definitely breaks things down. Sorry to add that in there, but I just wanted to drive that point home.
Yeah, so I've got, one of my friends, he's a conservative friend, and he sometimes shares Fox News stories with me, and then but then it's but he sometimes frames in very accusatory terms, right? Which is to say, look at what this whatever Charles official or this left wing crazy said, right? And you as being a lefty, right, pointing at me, should speak out against it. And 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 for me, I mean, this friend, I mean, he might be well intentioned. I mean, I don't know, but he's obviously making a logical leap, which I cannot accept, right? Which is this idea that it's like a football match, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you have the two sides, the two fan bases, right, who are in the stadium, and then I'm supposed to wear, the jersey of that team, which you might call the left wing team, right? And then he's supposed to wear the jersey of the right wing team, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then I'm fully responsible for everything that the people who supposedly wear the same jersey as me say and do, right? And I mean that's obviously that's a ridiculous position, right? I mean, I think that in most cases, I think people uh, you could say wear jerseys depending on the issue, right? So I mean, I
Yeah.
don't know. I mean, I might be very progressive on social issues and economic issues, but for instance, with the police defunding movement, I mean, I'm definitely against the police abolition movement, but I'm not. But with the police defunding, I think we'd have to look at the details. I think we have to look at the crime rate, crime statistics in the neighborhood, in the city, right, that we're talking of. So I mean, it has to be really an empirical examination of what's happening on the ground. But would that make me like a left wing crazy, or would it make me sort of a right wing one? I mean,
It depends on, so it depends on where you sit, actually.
yeah,
So I know you're trying to highlight the ridiculousness of this, but a lot of the time we forget that people are mixed in their beliefs.
exactly. That's what I was.
So
Yeah,
I I am not, I don't really align perfectly with any political party. I have a lot of non-orthodox beliefs and I don't fit comfortably anywhere. But I will say that if you were to by and large sum me up, I am on the left far more than I am on the right. But my opinions are not really allowed to be nuanced depending on the circles that I walk in. So you, in your position, would be deeply criticized two times over. So you have the law and order types who are taking a look at rising crime, and they'd say, you're even going to consider taking away from the cops? Take a look at what a few weeks without them has been. Don't you understand that you are literally going to destroy the city if you do that? Some people will definitely make that argument, particularly amongst the more conservative people in your life. On the opposing viewpoint, you'll have people saying that you may be apologizing or making your peace with elements of white supremacy by not abolishing a legacy white supremacist institution, aka the police. That you being a liberal and more moderate on that position is something to be deeply criticized for, rather than something to be celebrated for. The problem is that neither of them really actually represent people. They represent distilled ideological forms. They have an ideal that they want to pursue, and when you don't actually fully embrace the wholeness of that pursuit, they'll start to question you. So you're in favor of UBI? If they're also in favor of UBI, they'll be your very best friend. But then the moment you start to say, I don't really believe these other things, I think we need to be more data-driven, then you leave yourself open to the criticism of being a member of the opposite team. So the jerseys, they aren't just left and right, they're left and right on every single issue. So even if you agree with someone mostly, in most circumstances, you can still leave yourself open to and almost something akin to a betrayal by some people who will say that you're no better than a Republican. And you're going to see this a lot in criticisms of liberals in the Democratic Party. I am seeing a lot of progressives find the term liberal offensive in a way that I never thought that I would before. And I have a feeling that just as much as you can create a collapse of sense-making between the left and the right, you can create a collapse of sense-making within the left and within the right. And I think that that is a particular concern once we enter into a phase where both domestic parties and outside actors can foment the type of disagreement that is already naturally embedded in this type of information landscape, which is part of the reason why I want to go to Northeastern and just study this for 4 or 5 years.
I think it's eminently reasonable. So a point I wanted to pick up on. So with regard to this police brutality, I mean, there's one thing that has to be mentioned, which is to, you could say, tackle the religion of the U.S., which is the Second Amendment. You know, so I think one major issue that we have is that, you know, it's much more dangerous to be a cop in the U.S. Than in any other developed country, right?
Oh yeah.
I mean, the idea is in the UK where there's very, very few police shootings, and in many cases, police officers don't even have the guns on them when they're patrolling, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there isn't even the possibility of killing somebody. And it's very noteworthy that, you know, the violent crime in the UK, I think overwhelmingly is knife crime, right? So because obviously you cannot prohibit knives. I mean, you know, you need knives to cut your meat at home, right? So knife crimes occur, but then, you know, you're not going to have the, you know, like AK-47 or AR-15 or whatever, the assault rifles. You're not going to have crazies who legally procure a gun and then go around and shoot up people. And I think it's because of this higher trauma of being a cop in the States, where so you do a traffic stop and then you see the person in the car, you know, grabbing his pocket. Well, you don't know, is he going to take out his license or is he going to take out a gun, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then of course and then in those high adrenaline situations, right, you're going to have to you have a microsecond to make a decision, right? Or maybe a few microseconds to make a decision
Mm-hmm.
about whether you preemptively, you know, shoot the suspect, right, or whether wait and do nothing and then hope that they that the suspect doesn't pull a gun at you. And so that's sort of micro situation, micro psychology of being a cop. I think we have to understand that, uh, and I think gun legislation must be put front and center, even though with the George Floyd case. I mean, we haven't seen the Second Amendment discussions come up at all. But okay, so yeah, okay, do you want to say something like that?
No. Finish your thought. I didn't mean to cut you off.
Oh no. So this is just a brief rejoinder on this issue, and then about this larger issue about anger and fear being more amplified in the context of social media. I was wondering whether that has to do with the way how the human brain is wired, essentially, because so our ancestors are hunters and gatherers, and of course they didn't have buildings, they didn't have air conditioning and heat and comforts and stuff. So if they were sort of like happy for brief periods of time, right, and then they became sad again, okay, well, it's not such a big deal. But then if they didn't react to fear in an appropriate manner, like for instance, if an animal is about to attack them and kill them and eat them, right? Because that's when you're supposed to have fear, right?
Right.
But if you don't react to that, well, then you're going to die, right? So that's why the brain is wired to take negative cues much more seriously than positive cues. I mean, just another stupid analogy I have here is a traffic light, right? So, you would design a traffic light such that the stop would be red, and then the green light would be go. Well, why is that? Well, because the red light is much stronger in the senses, right? Because if you don't stop in red, you're gonna get into a traffic accident. While vice versa, if you stop when it's green, it's kind of like, you're not going to die from it, right? I mean, people are going to honk at you, but but you're not going to die from it. Yeah. So I don't know whether you had any sort of anthropological thoughts about so how our brain is interacting with social media.
Oh yeah, I have plenty of thoughts, although that's mostly just me adapting and using the product of cognitive science and evolutionary biology. But there are plenty of people who take a look into that. What I would do is rewind a little bit and talk about your view of the suspicion about police officers with regards towards their threat environment. Police officers aren't at their most at-risk profession, but they do die a lot. They die a lot for their numbers. And a lot of the people that they go up against are exceedingly well armed. So I'm not sure if you know too much about this, but the type of organized crime networks inside of the United States, they are exceedingly well armed. They're more well armed than some national militaries. And that is something of the reason why we are increasingly seeing the militarization of the police. And why when you see a SWAT team, you think the special forces were called. It's an evolving environment that's very difficult to disentangle, to the point where I'm not sure that there's a solution whereby you could reasonably argue that gun control is going to solve that, because we're in a situation now where the population is already armed to the point where it is almost inconceivable to get rid of them, in a way that would not see the type of backlash that would be truly horrific. Because, let's face it, we've already seen quite a few governments try to ban AR-15s, try to have mandatory buybacks or mandatory seizures. They've had almost no effect. And most of the police officials have no intention of going into private homes to try to seize them, in large part because I have heard anecdotally that in the place of the people they're trying to seize the weapons from, they would probably shoot the person trying to take it from them. Because in our country, we have a very, very strong belief system in our right to bear arms. And a government trying to take it away under the grounds of public safety feeds into the fear sector of a large number of people, particularly with regards towards those adversarial information networks again. And this is how you allow conspiracy theories to thrive, by the way. As in, once you get to a point where even the sensible position on your own team starts to go away, then the world no longer resembles reality at all. As in, you will find corners of the internet whereby even the most progressive position that your friend has is insufficiently radical. Same with the right-wing position. This is where you get horrific groups like the alt-right starting to emerge, or things like Boogaloo Boys. That's sort of a joke term, but it really shouldn't be. As in, it really isn't a good position at all. But one thing that probably killed off the gun control story is that one of the things that we saw with regards towards the new protests and to some extent the new riots are a skyrocketing gun sales statistic, most of which are new gun owners, which means that you are seeing far more people armed than at any point in the past few decades. And they're being armed with pretty powerful machinery, too. And it's not just conservatives now. One of the things that you're seeing is a rise in gun ownership by minority groups under the guise of local policing or local protection. So if you believe that the power structures of your locale are designed to kill you and devalue your life, then being armed isn't a crazy solution. But you do need to buy into a crazy position in order to get there. And a large number of people are starting to believe that. And even the types of people that don't believe that simply want it for when police no longer seem to be able to do their jobs. And you're seeing that in a lot of the cities where there was looting and places being burnt down. A lot of firms that had no interest in desiring or obtaining weapons went right to the stores to buy some, because they were convinced that if they didn't have it, they might end up getting shot or killed. And a lot of people have been shot. A lot of people. A lot of people have been assaulted. And it's very difficult to say that there's no need when it seems as though there is. So how do we make people feel safe enough to stop running and procuring these weapons, such that we can enter into a situation whereby the police no longer need to fear the people they are supposed to protect? And I'm highly sympathetic to that notion, at least to some extent. I mean, I don't want to ban guns, period. As in, that's ridiculous. In this country, it's ridiculous. But I do want to make it so that we no longer have people feeling the need to store up on massive amounts of highly powerful weaponry under the suspicion that their government, their local police force, or their fellow citizens might have a desire to do them harm. And we're seeing a large number of people who are falling into that category. And I don't know how to fix it. I wish I could.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is that do we accept the Second Amendment as a religion, or do we debate it as a rational policy, and where public safety considerations trump the religious aspect of it? So uh, it is a hugely uh, difficult issue, and I just want to cite one research paper I think in sociology by my department professor Matthew Desmond. So it
Sure.
deals with what's called the Ferguson effect, right? Which is the idea that after the Ferguson, Missouri anti police protests, you had a spike in violence and crime in the neighborhood because basically what happened. So there were two things that happened. So on the police side, um, there was more fear about another potential outrage, which means that they are less inclined to, go after the suspects. But then, but that's not Desmond's claim. Desmond's claim was that another mechanism is that the residents themselves, because of what they saw on social media and on TV, were less inclined to call the cops if something happened, right? And because they're influenced by the news media that whatever the cops are racist, that yeah, so and then they don't call the cops, and then of course the criminals will get away with stuff, right?
Right.
Um, and uh, that so that is hugely concerning, and I think we have to. That's what I mean with those things. With well, what's the proper police community relationship, right? I mean, I think it has to be it has to be rationally discussed, right? I mean, which is to say, I think it has to be taken out of the sort of the Ethernet, right? Out of the social media circles, and I think you know I mean, this is like maybe like this idealist Jürgen Habermas kind of thinking here, but so Habermas had this idea of like the public sphere, right?
Hmm.
Which is it's so it's partly it has to do with like media, right? So it's about columnists, like your Thomas Friedman types who write stuff on New York Times and everybody reads it. But also part of it has to do with like physical locations, right? So in Europe, which is to say France, Germany, UK, they have these you could call them salons, right?
Hmm.
Which is it's physical places where I guess mostly middle class people, right? So you could say it's a little bit elitist because you exclude working class people, but where people could come and then they would have discussions, and it's a little like a cafe, right? And they can exchange ideas, and it's very important to have these face-to-face encounters, which I know it's difficult during COVID, right? But I'm saying in normal times, we would come together and physically, and then we would have a reasonable argument. And then you notice that face-to-face, these reasonable arguments, they're possible, right? Because if I have to look you in the eyes, then it's much harder for you to demonize me, right? While if you sit on the other side in the social media platform and I don't see you, and I could hurl abuses at you without you being able to retaliate, right? Um, that 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 setting I think is very bad to discuss political issues, but the sort of the salon, this Habermasian, uh, public sphere, That sounds like a really, appealing, way forward, right? I don't
Well,
know.
yeah,
What are some thoughts on
it,
that?
it certainly reminds us that the people that we disagree with are people. And that seems to be one of the things that we've been losing track of, not in the literal sense. I'm sure they all do, at least mostly. I don't want to talk about the lizard people. At least, even as a joke, that's terrible. So, I believe that most people are able to recognize to some extent that they are competing against other people. The problem is that I think that a lot of people have allowed themselves to believe that the opposing side is at or near a point of no redemption. And when you're dealing with someone who's not just wrong, not just harming you, but is outright irredeemable, then you find yourself in a situation that would perpetuate some particularly nasty viewpoints and policy discussions. And while it's a little bit optimistic, perhaps even naive, to believe that it's harder to hold those positions when you're talking to someone, it certainly is a far preferable solution to people hiding behind handles and pictures, arguing against essential phantoms. So I think we could call it de-individuation or something akin to that, with regards towards not only losing yourself in a cause, but no longer really recognizing the opposing individuals as individuals with complex opinions, which is why it's very easy to see things like owning the libs or nonsense like that. It's just a fundamental vacancy in our communal reasoning that I think that we can partially overcome in that fashion. And that is why I am particularly concerned about movements that are designed to limit that. So groups that would try to make it so that, I don't know, Steven Pinker isn't allowed to talk. And I don't really agree with Steven Pinker on a lot of things, but if someone like Steven Pinker isn't allowed to go to Princeton and talk to students because there are fears that his positions harm the safety of the Princeton student body, then I think something has gone fundamentally wrong. And I do not know how to fix that. If anything, we should be trying to promote those types of communal spaces whereby conversations can take place, even uncomfortable ones, because it allows for an identification of true beliefs in a way that being behind a computer doesn't allow. Even if we were to take a transcript of what we said in this podcast, and there are softwares that will just automatically make a transcript of this. I actually think you could just autoplay it with a Google Doc that has like speech to text software associated with it, and then you
Oh,
could
yeah, I've
just
done that for research. Yeah, I've done that before.
yeah. So
Google.
so that would actually be pretty cool. But if you were able to do that and read it, you would have a fundamental different takeaway from this conversation than if we were just talking. Not the least because of how much I'm talking during this. People are going to say, why doesn't he just shut up? I'm sure. In any case, there's a there's a fundamental step towards developing a conversation that requires a dialectical, communal, communicative process. And I think one of the things that we are seeing as a byproduct of adversarial information networks and the associated heathen rhetoric and partisanship, not to mention associated extremist effects, which are second and third order effects from the original problem, I find that all of those things are designed to ensure that the window of acceptable positions are taken away from you, that they're made smaller and smaller. And I think that this feeds into a vicious cycle whereby you see an increasing purification of positions and an increasingly abstract understanding of your opposition. And here's a very easy way to influence this type of discussion. Imagine you are engaging in a space where all of the Democrats disappeared. and the only thing you had left were Republicans and independents. The independents, by default, become the new Democrats. Let's do this again. Now there are only Republicans. Who then become the Democrats? They're your moderate sense makers. They are your neoconservatives. They are the people who are in purple states. They're particularly older people who may have had different living experiences, so that they might have lived in blue states. They're your professionals, the people who have to deal with Democrats and ordinary people on your day-to-day. Those then become your left wing. Let's do it again. They're gone. Who's your new left wing? Your center hard conservative. Not your libertarians, not your populist right, but your firm Republicans, your Mitt Romneys and your George Bushes. They become the new Democrat. Do this once more. Who's your Democrat? And now it's starting to get very uncomfortable, because even conservative opinion that we would start believing to be obscene ends up becoming the default sensible position. And you do this 5, 6, 7 more times. And now you're in a closed environment where there are maybe 100 to 200,000 people of you inside of the country, and you are no longer dealing with an environment that allows for you to even recognize the existence of a sensible position beyond your own. And these groups are affiliated with the alt-right, they're affiliated with various militia groups, they're sometimes called black-pilled people. There is a whole community out there that are not very large as a percentage of the population, but because information is flat. Remember earlier, I said that physical goods aren't flat, but information is pretty close to flat. Because information is flat, you're able to find people who are able to find this type of void and fill it. And they're able to create relatively large communities from almost completely obscene and ridiculously extremist positions. This is how you find spreading of conspiracy networks, and it has a reciprocal effect. So you take out the Republicans, then who then become the conservatives? It's the independents. Try it again. And this is what you see happening inside of some more progressively oriented institutions. The centrists, the moderates, your blue dogs, they are conservative. They don't matter. And then your more moderate liberals like Nancy Pelosi, well, she's a corporatist. She's no different from a Republican. She's just slightly more willing to engage in a more progressive rhetoric. Not really all that different. So then you get rid of them, and then you have a new discussion. And your new discussion is with increasingly smaller amounts of people. I believe that one of the best ways to overcome that is to ensure that those types of self-isolation feedbacks are disrupted. And I believe that they are best disrupted when you have ongoing conversations. Maybe not a utopian ideal where you have people from all walks of political life in the same tent discussing things. But at the very least, you do not want to create a situation where people like Nancy Pelosi and Kamala Harris are seen as irredeemably conservative and need to be opposed. Or where Mitt Romney, John McCain, and George W. Bush are turned into rhinos. No true conservative, not a real Republican, little more than a Democrat in red clothing. That process is so destructive that if it continues, I'm not sure how we have a functioning democracy anymore. Certainly not with a first-past-the-post system. But even a pluralistic society, even a pluralistic voting method with many parties where you do proportionality, even in that circumstance, I'm not entirely sure how you're able to create a sense-making process where the groups to your immediate left or right end up becoming a representation or an avatar of opinion that is no longer acceptable. And I'm sure that you've come across different groups in your life where your positions are seen as too conservative or too liberal for you to even be included in the conversation. I'm sure you have, because I have.
Oh yeah, it certainly does happen. So when you were talking, and I was thinking about this German intellectual. His name is Carl Schmitt, and I was so he was like a big
He's
Nazi
the Nazi
intellectual.
one, right?
Yeah, he was a Nazi intellectual, but he had a very, I think, interesting
That is not what anyone wants to
definition.
hear. I just want to let you know that that's not what anyone wants to hear.
Yeah,
You
but
know what you're thinking? It's making me think of a Nazi. Definitely not what
okay, all
anyone
right,
wants
okay,
to
okay,
hear.
okay. All right, let's conclude the thought here. So Carl Schmitt, he had a very interesting definition of politics, right?
Okay.
Um, which is let's so it's about fighting enemies, right?
Ah,
Which is
ah.
it's a very cynical way of looking at the world, but obviously there are a lot of people who are sort of striving for political power, and they operate exactly according to that pattern, right? Because so my definition of politics, you could call it idealist, right? Which is the idea that it's basically using the instruments of power for good purposes, right? Like give people healthcare, give people education, social services, economic security, and so forth, right? So that's sort of that's how I want to understand politics, right?
Hmm.
But it's not exclusively how it operates, because the Schmittian definition of politics is, is embedded in the way how you could say the populist leaders, like Viktor Orban, Bolsonaro, Trump, Putin, uh, Erdogan. I mean, it's how these people operate successfully, right? And by success, I mean attaining power and holding on to power.
Hmm.
Um, and where it's like, well, I mean, you could use a lot of examples. I mean, I'm doing a research paper on Viktor Orban now, so that's why I can say a little bit about him, right? Where it's this idea of like, we're going to fight the refugees who are coming in 2015, that from the Middle East, from Africa, right? Those brown and black people, they would dilute our Hungarian race. We should keep them out. It's very interesting, however, is that there's very few migrants and refugees from Middle East and Africa going to Hungary, right?
Hmm.
Most of them pass through. They go to Austria, Germany, and Sweden. Um, but still, he still creates this enemy image, right? The second enemy image that he has is the European Union, right? Because the European Union is supposedly forcing this racial dilution of the Hungarian race, and is also like, messing up our political structures, which is really a way of saying that. So what Orban has been doing is he undermined the democratic institutions, right? He basically neutered the media, the courts, and civil society, right? So any opposition group against him, and of course the European Union, which wants to preserve rule of law, is of course not very happy about it, and so they monitor, they threaten sanctions. They have never actually sanctioned at all, but they still take up the rhetoric mantle, and and Orban can use that, so to attack the European Union for infringing on Hungarian sovereignty. Um, and even though the European Union is funding 5.6 billion euros every year into like it's called the cohesion fund. It's basically European money to build bridges and highways in Hungary, right? To simplify it. So he's getting a lot of money from the EU, but he can still sort of trash them. Uh, and then his third enemy is George Soros, right? So Soros is this Hungarian-American investor. He was born in Hungary, but then he moved to UK and later to US. And he funds these, philanthropists, you could say liberal slash neoliberal kind of, organizations, NGOs, universities, stuff like that. Um, and and then Soros becomes the main target as enemy for Viktor Orban to retain power in the country, right? Because he alleges that that Orban alleges that Soros is gonna, attract all these migrants and refugees, and then again destroy the Hungarian race. Totally crazy ideas, but if you think about it, I mean, if you accept the idea that Schmittian politics is a way to succeed, right, politically, then you fully understand where people like Orban is coming from, where people like Trump is coming from, right? And then now with the Brexit vote, right? So it's like, okay, well, so the Boris Johnson and Nigel Farage, they were saying, oh, it's these damn like Romanians and Bulgarians, the EU migrants that gave us problems. Well, now that's out the window, right? Because now they're doing the Brexit. So I'd be really curious to see who the next enemy is going to be, because they're going to have to look for them, right?
Oh yeah, they definitely need to look for them, and they don't actually really need to be 100% real either. But yeah, actually, I think that that's probably a fairly good way to look at this. I would also say that you could also find other people who have similar belief systems. I'm thinking of Foucault, who believed that power structures were an inherently cynical game, whereby politics was just a competing power structure arrangement that had almost nothing to do with any form of idealism. I think that when you define politics idealistically speaking, you put yourself in a category that rejects Schmittian approaches, but once you put yourself in a cynical category, you're going to find a very expansive network of people that have very similar views. So, yeah, I think that once you no longer view the democratic process as a means towards achieving an end on a nationally beneficial level, and you start viewing it as a political enterprise whereby you are seeking to obtain power and extract benefits for your particular constituents to the point where you're opposing other constituents, then you see yourself in a particularly nasty cycle. If anything, it reminds me a little bit of Darren Ashimoglu and James Robinson's work on extractive political institutions versus inclusive political institutions. A little bit like that.
Could you describe that those two concepts briefly?
Okay. Sure. So, how many years ago? A few years ago, they wrote a book called Why Nations Fail. In it, they describe a vicious cycle whereby extractive economic and political institutions feed into each other to the point where it damages not only the economic prospects of the country, but it allows for the failure of democratic institutions and seeks to establish a adversarial relationship on how best you're supposed to extract resources and political power, such that it leads to civil war and civil conflict when that type of ambition is frustrated. So a way to look at it would be like Sierra Leone. There are actually probably way too many examples of that. But what I brought that up for is that if you take a look at it, you can see the fissures start to emerge within a political system whereby individual constituents start to view the power game as one where you are seeking to take the most benefits for yourself and harm others. So that's what it reminded me of. A little bit. Then there's also Foucault. Foucault reminded me a whole lot more of what you were saying, or what Carl Schmitt was saying.
Yeah, and it's a deeply damaging, and it's a very cynical view of political life. I when we're already in political philosophy, my sort of favorite view about how political life could be structured is comes from Aristotle, right? And so he rewrote this book about, I think, the politics and constitution of Athens. And he says that there's two varieties of three different political structures. So the two varieties is good and bad, right? And then the three structures is one man rule, few men rule, and then everybody rules, so kind of democratic. And so out of these six possibilities, he thinks the ideal is sort of like a constitutional government, right? And in the constitutional government, I mean, you have sort of democratic rule, right, where you allow the sort of masses to participate in the chamber, in the political chamber. Mm-hmm. Preferably not through elections, interestingly, but through the lottery. So it kind of works like a jury duty almost, right? You become a congressman or a senator based on the draw of the lot. And then you'd also be paid for these activities because in the old days you didn't pay politicians, so which means that only patricians who owned land and could survive independently would become politicians. Mm-hmm. So democratic government is you pay the politicians, which is, by the way, why I'm against pay cuts to politicians. Even though it's a very popular position, but I would just say that paying a $200,000 per head salary is a lot cheaper than the millions of dollars of bribes that will result in billions of dollars in tax breaks to special interests. So that's the democratic element, and then you have and you could say an aristocratic element. An aristocratic means the rule of the few. And then I know that because of the Alexis de Tocqueville and sort of the democratic anti-elitist ideology in the U.S., maybe using the word elite is kind of a dirty word, right? Right. But it makes sense if you if you look at actual examples. So take, say, Anthony Fauci, right? The infectious disease expert, was a very obscure guy, right? Prior to the pandemic, he was the director of the NIAID, right? The Infectious Disease Center, and I was watching a bunch of his old interviews, and the great success that he produced in the past was the antiretroviral for drugs for AIDS, right? HIV. Because if you recall, I mean, HIV used to be a disease where once you got it, you would die within like 10 years, right? But with retroviral, the drug cocktail, so to speak, you could live a close to normal life while being HIV positive. So that was a huge success story of Anthony Fauci. Now, I didn't know about this, prior to the pandemic. And well, we see that Fauci's reputation is being destroyed by this narcissist president, right? Whose craziness lies very deep in his family. If you read Mary Trump's Donald Trump's niece biography, but wouldn't you say that in the case of pandemic containment, that it absolutely makes sense to empower people like Fauci, right? Like you don't want to have the next best guy that you find on the street be in charge of the pandemic control, right?
Yeah, you're hinting at the expertise matters argument, and I'm reminded of an article in Foreign Affairs by Tom Nichols, The Death of Expertise.
Right.
I'm not sure if
Yeah,
anyone
what's your
in the
take on that?
audience. Huh?
What's your take on expertise and what's happening there?
His take is that expertise matters, but we are in an environment that is increasingly hostile towards it, particularly as we traditionally have had the ability to make decisions in our life as a reasonably autonomous society, such that we knew how to do things ordinarily. So the story of the everyman is something of a myth nowadays, but if you went back 60 or 70 years, there was a basic core competency that every functioning adult, particularly adult men, should be able to do. And that has informed a sort of rebelliousness inside of American society, although I think I'm starting to blend my own opinions in with Tom Nichols on this one. So instead, I will cease to talk about my take on that idea, and I'll just remind where to find this article. It was published in Foreign Affairs about a year ago or 2 years ago. You could also find the guy on Twitter. Tom Nichols has a Twitter. It's called The Death of Expertise, and I thought it was one of the best articles in that foreign affairs or foreign policy focused journals that year, period. I highly recommend that you guys take a look at it, whoever's listening. And you, everyone. I recommend myself go back and take a look at it because it was very good, and I'm actually starting to get irritated with myself that I couldn't recall the core verbatim. And I don't want to put words in his mouth. He's a fairly established guy. So yeah, go take a look at it.
But of course, you like the idea of expertise as well, right?
Expertise is necessary, as in.
I mean, as somebody who takes a master's degree and is going on a PhD program, and of course, I'm an aspiring PhD myself, so I think we have a very biased viewpoint. But
we do have a biased viewpoint, but I can solve this easily. Who do you want to fix your electricity? An electrician. Who do you want to treat you when you are sick? A doctor. When you require surgery, do you want someone who specializes in the particular form of surgery, or do you want someone who might have been a nurse 5 years ago who never really dealt with anything beyond the sniffles? Trust me, people develop hierarchies of competence, and that is what is known as expertise. And that is essentially how we decide things on an ideal level. I think most people typically have suspicions against expertise because they view the expertise as somehow fraudulent. But if you assume that the expertise holds validity, at that point it no longer becomes a real discussion to oppose it. Now, if you think the person who holds the expertise is something of a fraud or a political hack, then their opinion is no better than yours or some random person you find online, particularly maybe someone who's doing a live stream on Facebook or Twitter and has a bunch of followers as a popular commentator. Then suddenly that becomes the main source of authority. So in the battle between Fauci or Fauci, it should be Fauci.
It's Fauci.
Whatever. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
I looked up the Italian pronunciation, and it's Fauci. So
Yeah, yeah, I know that, but he occasionally says it differently, and I'm like, uh, I'm just gonna call him Tony from now on. Okay, Tony. So Tony, he is competing in an arena of expertise that is different from Donald Trump. Donald Trump is assumed to have credibility because of the office he holds, because of the people who advises him. So if you're inclined to think that Donald Trump has the best people, giving him the best information, and Fauci is just this guy, Tony, he had a very successful career, but he's only one guy, so he can be wrong, while Donald Trump has access to a vast array of experts, so he knows more about it than anyone on planet Earth, then you're able to say, okay, Tony, thank you very much for talking, but you're making things worse. Let's go with the Trump position. And that is very susceptible and very seductive for people who already have a favorable opinion of Trump. For those who have a greater degree of respect for expertise, for experience, for past results, Tony or Fauci is very, very much respected. What we're seeing is a problem whereby there are those who recognize both degrees of credibility and they're competing with one another. Trump has no credibility as a disease expert, but he does have credibility as a figure of authority who should know better. So at that point, it plays into your suspicions. Do you think that he is manipulating evidence to only see what he wants to see, such that he can put forward a position and very much oppose people who disagree with him? If you're inclined to believe that, then you're not going to trust him. If you think that Donald Trump is to the point of a political position whereby he would actively harm society so that he can get reelected and keep the economy going, you are also going to disavow him and support Fauci. But if you do think that the president, as holder of one of the most important offices in the world, is informed and should know what he's doing, then it becomes a problem. Because then you're left to wonder, just how much does Fauci actually know? Just how much should we actually trust him? And a lot of people, they might have trusted him at first, but they don't anymore.
well, so so you're speaking from the position of the Trump supporter. So the Trump supporter will say that, if you believe in Fauci, he's a liar. He doesn't know what he's talking about.
That's one way to go about it. Maybe not even that he's a liar and doesn't know what he's talking about, but might be going astray, might be too conservative. And I mean that in the sense of seeking to maintain safeguards. There are a lot of rationalizations that would allow for you to de-emphasize the expertise of Fauci, which is a problem. Because we're in an environment where we're dealing with competing ideal archetypes, but one of the people here are clearly not ideal representations of that archetype. Not at all.
Yeah, so it's a huge issue. I mean, we have to find ways how to restore the trust in the institutions. But I was just, because we social media was a big part of what we were talking about. I mean, without constraining to some extent what's happening on these platforms, right? I don't think we can get to a place where we defer to experts to tell us what's happening, right? I
Yeah,
mean,
and the problem is that
we'll go back to our echo chambers, and then whatever our side advances, it's going to happen. I think I saw like a national map which looked at mask wearing, the likelihood of mask wearing. I think it was in the New York Times like yesterday. And so the basic finding was that If you live in red counties, you are less likely to wear the mask, right? Um, and that to me is already that's a clear indication for views about expertise. Now, I mean, you could also argue, well, the red counties tend to be more rural, less densely populated. Maybe wearing a mask matters less in those spaces.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm sure if you control for that, I mean, you'll still find a partisan difference. Um, and that I mean, especially when it comes to things like public health, right? I mean, if you say that, well, okay, you and I, let's say, have a different opinion about gay marriage or abortion or whatever, like sort of like the perennial hot button social issues. Um, we could sort of debate this without that being very consequential. But I think right now in a pandemic, where the thing that we're negotiating right now is the margin of death, right? So it's like how many additional dead people uh, do we morally tolerate, right?
Mm-hmm.
Through our actions, through mask wearing and resources in hospitals, etc. Um, and I, in those circumstances, I mean, I would like to have a much more, I don't know, less democratic and more expertise focused approach, if that makes sense.
Well, I wouldn't really frame it that way because when you say less democratic, I instinctively have a negative reaction to it. And I'm sure a lot of people do. And I don't actually really think that that's quite what you're saying. I think what you're really going for is not anti democratic, but the idea that embedded within democracy there is an innate respect for people who should know what they're doing. And that it plays into the role of an informed citizenry. So why I brought up the two competing ideas of credentials is that is, typically speaking, the ideal case. The ideal case is that you do have someone who's very informed and hears a lot of opinions, and you have someone who is very well talented and is an expert in their field. And then you could make up your own mind whether or not you believe that this expert who disagrees with the president is doing so because they are correct or just because they have an ideological position that is making them more susceptible to a specific form of debate or outcome. But at the end of the day, you do want to allow for things like a citizenry that has the right to be wrong. Because once we get to the point whereby experts are allowed to exist in a technocratic, almost unaccountable fashion, then we end up entering into very murky territory. And I can say this specifically for my tangential field, which is security. I don't, it's not that I don't trust the Pentagon or the military. In fact, the military is one of the most widely respected institutions in America, period. And in large part, it is well deserved. But I don't exactly want them to be the ones deciding policy without a voice of a civilian, especially not when that voice is the commander in chief, the president of the United States, or the secretary of defense. In both search situations, I desperately want that civilian voice and that civilian control. And this goes at the heart of a tension between the two classical thoughts in American military policy. They'd probably both be considered fairly conservative, but this is the predominant paradigms. You have Samuel Huntington's idea that the military is a professional body that is filled with expertise. It is a profession, and no matter how much time and effort a politician puts into it, they will never have enough knowledge to tell the military no in a way that holds credibility. And then you have the, what is the best way to put this? It's an idea put forward by Elliot Cohen. It's called the unequal dialogue, but I'm trying to find a way to explain it a little bit better. In a sense, this is when there is a reciprocal relationship between the civilian leadership and the experts, such that the outcome is a reflection of civilian leadership and civilian control and a civilian authority, but is still done with full respect for the expertise of the military. I think it's a little bit oversimplifying it, particularly given the unequal nature of it, but it's close enough. So when it comes to disease experts, you don't want Fauci to be above the president or above democracy, but you do want his position to carry weight, authority, and respect. So I wouldn't go all the way down this undemocratic rabbit hole, in large part because I can already hear the chorus of people who would strongly object, if not for practical reasons, then for purely moral and ethical ones. This notion of devotion towards democracy for democracy's sake. But I definitely understand the need for expertise, the need for professional experience, the need for that place to be privileged, but not domineering, if you know what I'm saying. Does that sound about right to you?
Yeah, that's reasonable. So I mean, with this pandemic, I think I fully subscribe to what you just said, right? So you're gonna have the infectious disease expert. He offers the expertise. He gives a press conference. He speaks to journalists, and he advises the president. And then the president would have to make a decision about, how to control the pandemic. Now, of course, the linchpin here in this case is the president, right? For which leadership has been lacking, to say the least. And I would even say that, I think what the administration is doing is, at the most charitable view is to call it negligent, grossly negligent. And then the worst framing of it, I think, is criminal, essentially. I mean, this whole point about, like, okay, we're going to force the colleges to open up by threatening to cancel the foreign student visas, right? That's one thing. I mean, it just recently got overturned again. Or when the White House press secretary says, we're going to open up the schools in the fall, regardless of what the science says, which is to say, regardless of what the virus situation is on the ground. I don't know. I mean, this is gross negligence with respect to the health and safety of the population. And so, I mean, so there's a huge responsibility, therefore, on the president of the U.S. And now, I think the thing that somewhat saves us from completely spiraling out of control is that the governors still have a lot to say. So I mean, like in New York or in New Jersey, we've been able to control the pandemic spread now somewhat, not perfectly, but somewhat. But yeah, but there's definitely been a complete failure in the part of the federal government to address the pandemic, and it's gross negligence. And I think, I mean, so what's your take on on the November elections. I mean, with of course the pandemic and economic crisis in the background. We
If it
have
happened today,
yeah.
if it happened today, then we would have President Biden. The problem is that as time progresses, we're going to see some issues. We're going to see increasing weaponization of the fallout of marginal opinions and marginal activities during the protests. I can almost see and anticipate the ads, and they will show burnt down buildings. They will show beaten and bloodied people. And you will find a lot of crying people weeping over their homes or their stores, asking why. Now, to anyone who has actually been in one of these protests, you'll know that those aren't very common. You'll even know that the protests and the riots take place at different times of day. So it actually seems as though that it's only after a certain hour that you start to see rioting and looting and things like that. But I can see the ads. And I can see the fear. I can anticipate it. And I am concerned that that will ultimately come to harm President Biden. I'm also concerned about the debates. Biden is supposed to debate Donald Trump a couple of times on stage. I'm not sure how that will turn out. President Biden, or future President Biden, hopefully, or current, past Vice President Biden, he has not been the best at controlling the rhetoric he uses in an unscripted manner. He did well during some of the Democratic debates, but he wasn't the sharpest or the quickest. And I worry that someone like Donald Trump will be able to unnerve him or get under his skin and result in some very, very unfortunate statements. I'm also worried that people are starting to get numb to accusations. And numbness is also key to the partisan polarization. I'm starting to see a lot of people get numb to certain criticisms of President Trump and a lot of solidification of opinions, such that the sway that we saw with the protests might just default back. Because we thought that there were plenty of events that was going to destroy him in 2016, and it didn't happen. And I would be worried that we might find ourselves in a similar situation where we believe in complacency. And that is going to harm us. On the plus side, just because those are concerns, Trump needs to fundamentally radically turn around his current situation in order for that to emerge as a truly viable option. Right now, it's just a fear of mine. It's a fear that it might be increasingly coming. And remember the adversarial information networks. I'm sure you heard about the replacement of Congressman Engel from New York.
No, I've heard of that.
Okay. So he was kicked out by New Blood, but Engel was something of the key foreign policy person in the Democratic Party. His out-primarying by someone who has radically different policy positions has sent shockwaves through the foreign policy community and the Democratic Party. Because there was a lot of establishment support behind, I think he was a 16 or 12-time congressman. And he's gone. Very similar to Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez.
So he was primaried and he lost the primary.
Yeah, out-primaried. Yeah.
Okay.
And I think that you're going to see a general trend where particularly municipal Democrats are turning against or rejecting establishment Democrats. And you might end up having a replication of the Tea Party takeover of the Republican Party. And I think you're going to find a lot of people who are practically desperate to vote for the Democrats potentially start to turn away. Because right now you've got a whole lot of Mitt Romney and George W. Bush people and George H.W. Bush people campaigning for Joe Biden. And there was a massive defection. Almost all of the centrist Republicans, they're voting for Joe. And they want Joe to win. They desperately want Joe to win. In a way that they might not have been if it was a candidate Warren or a candidate Sanders. And I'm concerned that that desperation might not hold if the prevailing viewpoint of the Democratic Party shifts in such a way that they would be more inclined to vote in the name of someone else. I'm thinking of Governor Larry Hogan. I think his name is Larry Hogan. No, is it? His last name's Hogan, but I think Larry Hogan is arrested, something like that. So, anyways, he voted for his dad during the 2016 election. He said he couldn't support Trump, but he wasn't going to vote for Hillary either, so he just voted for his dad. I'm worried that you're going to see a whole lot of people vote that way, and I'm also worried about dissatisfaction among more progressive young voters in the Democratic Party who really don't like Biden, that they might vote for a Green candidate or a social justice Democrat candidate that appears somewhere. So you're going to have a whole lot of people voting for whoever the new Gary Johnson is, and a whole lot of people voting for whoever the new Jill Stein is. And I think that that might be a critical factor in ensuring that Trump is either reelected or narrowly defeated, when if those candidates didn't exist, he would have there would be very limited prospects for his reelection. And I'm concerned that we may end up entering into a situation where very likely voters who would very eagerly vote for Biden might not turn out. So I would be watching the next few months very, very, very carefully. And of course, there's also the complications of coronavirus. And there's the very real possibility that even if Trump loses, he might cry foul. And if he cries foul, what then? How do we deal with that? Hopefully, we deal with it by sending it to the Supreme Court like we did in 2000 with Al Gore and W. Bush. In the current court system, I know in academia they really hate it, but it's proven to be a very independent judiciary. Very independent.
Well, I find it very interesting. I mean, the Supreme Court that was it the Chief Justice John Roberts. Like so when he was appointed, I think in 2005 by George W. Bush, he sort of had very high credentials among sort of the conservative right.
Mm-hmm.
But then I think ever since this Obamacare ruling, which when was that, in 2014, 15, something like that, you could definitely tell that he sort of becomes the new Kennedy was a justice in the middle, yeah, so he's a Supreme Court Chief Justice now, but he sort of has this, you could call it, independent streak, which sort of blunts a little bit of the fact that Trump was able to appoint two new right-wing justices to the court.
True. And even with regards towards the ones that he's appointed, they haven't exactly been puppets either. So Gorsuch was responsible for taking down one of Trump's main objectives. And you're seeing some of the rejections of Donald Trump's policy objectives to be 7-2s. The 2s aren't Gorsuch and Kavanaugh, they're Clarence Thomas and Alito.
Alito,
yeah. Alito is actually the most conservative justice on the bench.
Yeah.
which is interesting. And Clarence Thomas isn't too far behind it. Now, far be it for me to defend
Yeah,
some
and
of these appointees, especially
there was
due to
this
the
headline.
controversy.
Yeah, there was a headline the other day about Ruth Bader Ginsburg's cancer treatment. Because she's 87 years old, right? So, if I'm, like just stating the biology here, I mean, she doesn't have too many years left, and
Yeah, it's
I
really
think
unfortunate.
I think Ginsburg is desperately trying to hold on at least for another year, hoping that Biden is going to win the election,
I get that feeling too.
And then she just might retire for the sunset years, or she
I don't
might
think
hold
she
on.
has any sunset years. Her cancer is, or rather, is known to be particularly fatal. The fact that she's been fighting against her for so many years is very commendable. And if she dies before November, you're going to see perhaps one of the largest awakenings of the left possible. But it would also be one of the most damaging things to the Supreme Court should she be replaced prior to Biden assuming office, or if Trump gets reelected.
Yeah, I
I,
mean,
I really, really hope, in a way that I have never hoped before, that if something does happen to RBG or Kagan or Sotomayor, that when they're replaced with Garland. Now, Garland was a moderate, as in he wasn't a traditional left-wing judge, at least not a particularly noteworthy activist judge. But that type of appointment would be a move that is light years in the direction of restoring and de-emphasizing some of the politicized nature of Supreme Court nominations. I would really want that in a way that I don't really want for much. But I don't think I'm going to get it, especially not under a President Trump. He's already threatened that if she goes, he's going to replace her with one of the most conservative female justices that exists. He's already assigned someone, at least on Twitter, to replace her. And if that were to happen, I could easily see a revolt in the Democratic Party designed to recall Supreme Court justices or add new ones or just change everything.
Yeah, so I think the first bad precedent with the Supreme Court justice appointment occurred when Justice Scalia died, I think in February of 16. So that was about the last year of the Obama presidency. He had another 11 months to go. And then the Republicans blocked the Garland appointment. I I thought this was already a very bad precedent, right? Because it
Oh, it was awful.
because then it then indicates, well, okay, so then so now the Democrats, well, we got to play dirty now, right? If um, which would be difficult now because I think the Senate is like 51-49 Republican now, and I don't think that they allow the filibuster on the judges anymore.
No, they got rid of that. And I just want to say that while Scalia was the one for the Supreme Court, for about 2 decades now, there's been increasing gamesmanship for the district court judges, one step down. So this escalation has been building, and it very well might continue to build in a way that is potentially very explosive. Very explosive.
Yeah.
And if we go down that road, we have effectively lost one of the strongest checks on executive overreach. Because if the Supreme Court is no longer trusted and becomes wholly partisan, or at the very least even has the reputation of being wholly partisan, then what? Because
Yeah.
oftentimes the image of partisanship is as important or more important than the reality of partisanship. I don't like it. I don't like it at all. So I really want RBG to stick it through. And I mean, I've read some of her stuff, some of her court decisions, some of her opinions. She has a book. She has a book written about her. She has multiple books written about her. I respect her a great deal, even if I don't really agree with a lot. Well, no. I actually do agree with a lot of what she puts forward on the court. I disagree with her sometimes, perhaps more than others, but for the most part, I think that she's been a very good Supreme Court justice. And when she goes, I'm not going to be happy.
Yeah. Well, the timing is the thing that counts, right?
Oh, the timing
So,
is incredibly important, but even
yeah.
ordinarily, it would still be a loss.
Yeah. So, on that point with Trump's re-election potential, I mean, so the statistic I like to keep track of is the approval rating, which is sort of like in the low 40s, maybe 41, 42. I mean, prior to the pandemic, it was 45.
Yep.
And but to have like 40% as a solid base, which are basically people who, regardless of how ridiculous, false, misleading, damaging the comments of the president are, those 40% of the Trump supporters, who are the Trump supporters, they feel even more vindicated, right? The fact that he's fighting those, the mainstream media, the establishment, the liberal academics, blah, 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 right?
The enemy.
The enemy, right? And that, so that's such a core base that if they turn out in the same way that they did 4 years ago, and then on the other end you have what you just explained, which is you're going to have the progressives who are going to sit at home, not voting, or they go for Jill Stein or one of the left wing. That it could lead to the re-election of Trump. Now, with respect to the debates, I mean, I would be somewhat worried because Biden himself is he's going to turn 78 this year, so he's not a young man by any stretch of imagination. And now, I mean, I wouldn't care as much. So Bernie Sanders is a year older than Joe Biden, but I wouldn't be too concerned about Bernie's age if he were to be the nominee and debate Trump, because you can tell that Bernie's, how should I say, mental acuity, right, sharpness, right, is still up to par, in order to oppose Trump. But with Joe Biden, I would be somewhat concerned, even though he's a year younger than Bernie. But I think that the mental juices aren't flowing as well as they used to. And I think he should have just retired. But still, at the same time, I somehow believe that the expectations on Biden is going to be very low, right? That's for everybody. I mean, the progressives, the moderate Democrats, so anybody who could potentially vote for him. So that's why I don't have the feeling that the debates, however they turn out to be, however many gaffes, either of these two candidates produce, I don't think it's going to move the needle that much.
I hope. I suppose a corollary to this is who he picks for VP. I'm waiting still. I think we're all still waiting.
Yeah, it would have to be slightly more progressive than him. I mean, obviously, like he's not going to appoint like a
Warren.
Sanders affiliate, right? Which there are some.
I kind of hope for Kamala Harris.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I don't have too strong of an opinion here, but it would
Don't
have
have
to
any
be.
preferences.
Yeah, so
How
my
about Stacey
preference,
Abrams?
yeah, slightly more progressive than Biden.
Well,
Um,
slightly isn't that hard in the modern Democratic Party.
yeah, I mean, but look, there has to be this olive branch, right? Because right now, uh, there's the Biden and the Sanders team and have negotiated a party program. But I think that's just words, right? Everybody knows these are just words on
I
paper.
mean, I'll push back a little bit on that one. Joe Biden is the most progressive candidate to have run for president as the official nominee. As in, I don't think that anyone was more progressive as a candidate that is the head of the party. Not in the primary sense. We've always had more progressive primary people. But Biden's platform isn't, it's not some return to Bill Clinton. It's not even a return to Obama. It's a fairly progressive, independently progressive platform. So I wouldn't be too inclined to think that it's just words or something like that. This is a pretty big shift. So I think the key move will be making sure that people believe it, which might be going to what you meant by words, but it is it is more than what would be considered a purely moderate platform.
Yeah, I mean, so here's the thing where the end game is would be. So let's assume Biden wins the election, and then let's say the Democrats keep the House, but they don't win back the Senate, or maybe the Senate will be complete parity, 50-50 or something like that. And then what Biden could, well, then in that sense, Biden would be seriously constrained. And I think, President Sanders would have faced the very same questions, right? Which is, how are you going to get a progressive agenda through the Senate? Um, if I was reading this article about the Obama presidency and sort of the frustrations that came up around 2010, when the House went Republican, and yeah, there wasn't any legislative effort since then. I mean, there have been some executive orders that were quite meaningful. I think the DACA program was probably the most meaningful.
Mm-hmm.
But he has been fairly restrained in a lot of the things that he did after the passage of the stimulus bill and the Affordable Care Act.
You're hitting a very, very, very important part, in large part because when Congress started to become dysfunctional, and I would say it started to become dysfunctional around the 1990s, it didn't reach full dysfunction, but it's getting worse, and it's getting worse all the time. It led to the rise of increasingly powerful executive prerogative, especially with respect to executive orders. So what you see is an increasing proliferation and reliance upon executive orders because a president is able to act more unconstrained when there's no unified Congress that's capable of providing a voice, which is why the Supreme Court as a check on the president has been so valuable, and it's why I really don't want it to fall. But that is monumentally important, and I want to highlight that because I'm going to need to go soon. So it sounds like that would be something very important to pick up on the next time we talk, if you want to.
Okay, sure. Yeah, I should let you go, Dennis. And
I'm sorry about the abruptness of this one. It's just that I just realized that we've been speaking for about 3.5 hours, and I'm getting looks.
to leave. So I figure that was a good segue.
Okay, yep. So I thank all my listeners, and yeah, thank you, Dennis. And
Let's definitely do this again, though.
we should.
Relatively soon.
Yes.